Thank you for being here today. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Neil Glickman. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to come. I'm going to start my presentation talking about communication. That's always the first topic, right? We have to establish how we're going to communicate all day while we're here. I will sometimes, when I give a formal presentation, I would speak using spoken English. And if people hear that use sign language, I sign back to them so that there's no barriers. So I expect this to be a discussion type day today more than just all lecture. So we will be doing some discussion, breakout groups and whatnot. So today I came with asthma bothering me today. Hopefully it will improve, but that does cause me problems breathing, which then I go to my plan B and use American Sign Language. So if you see me cough a little bit, don't worry, I'm not contagious. It's just my own asthma issue. I'm going to be drinking water throughout the day, and also my cough drops. They help a lot. I know it's not very professional to be popping cough drops during a presentation, but this, helps. It's more than just medication. So please bear with me and be flexible with our communication today throughout the day. Hopefully, you'll feel free to join in participating in the discussions we'll have today. So you can choose to either speak or sign. Raise your hand if you want to participate. Let me know which mode of communication, speaking or signing, and we'll get the logistics set up because this is being video recorded for future use. So if you're not understanding my signing, please stop me. I'll repeat myself. I'll go back. I just want clear communication throughout the day. Also, the interpreters and I agreed if we need to have interruptions, we'll go ahead and do that. Among the three of us, we'll be a good team today, so thank you. We have Brett in the back, our videographer. He needs to, we've made his job a little bit more complicated today with the switch up in the communication. So how's the video going for you back there, Brett? Are you able to?
We're good.
Okay, I'm going to switch to talk right now.
I'm going to talk right now.
So, all right. Hold on. So I've got two microphones on, and they have to come on and off also depending on how the day goes. So I hope I get this right, but Brett is here to help. And so if people are speaking, I also need to bring the microphone to you. So again, this will force us to it forces us to be more mindful of communication, which is a good thing anyway, always a good thing. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the day. I'm going to be over here. Right now I'm a little bit like Pavlov's dog, because if I stand here, I get this. So it's immediate punishment. So this will force me to be over here. And hopefully that will work, at least while I'm speaking. I want to talk a little bit about PowerPoints and the notes that are there. PowerPoint is notoriously deaf unfriendly, especially when you have lots of slides with heavy English text. But in fact, nobody likes those slides. Nobody really wants to read lots of text. And so when I develop this, I try to be mindful of that. But there are slides with text on them. The way I'm thinking about the PowerPoint, there's far, far more slides than I'm going to cover. If I had unlimited time, all the information is there that I would want to say. So in essence, they're your notes. But I'm going to try not to obsess over whether or not I've got every slide covered. I know I won't. especially because as we move on, I want to have a discussion. And I know that if I'm doing a good job of teaching and we're having a good discussion, we can get at a lot of the same points through discussion. And so I'm not going to worry about that. When you see slides with a lot of text, if it's important, the text, I'll read it to you or I'll give you time. It actually isn't necessary to keep focused on the slides. Of course, it helps if you have pictures. I always look for pictures just because it makes it more visually interesting. And of course, there are links to some YouTube clips that also helps. It's right in the PowerPoint. You just go boop, and if the technology works, it comes right up, and that's nice too. So please don't worry about watching and reading all the slides. So plan for the day. It's in 3 sections. It's actually not a lot of time. So this presentation I would normally do with another 2-hour block. So again, we'll get done as much as we can, but interacting is important. I want to start out, I'm a psychologist. I know this is you're mainly teachers or people in the teaching profession. So this is a presentation about how the mental health field and the educational field intersect when it comes to working with deaf students. There's a lot in common. And really what we have in common most, to sum it all up, is we're all dealing with language challenges. And when we have language deprivation or language problems, we're also getting the consequences of that, which is a lot of thinking problems, cognitive problems, psychosocial problems, which I'll discuss, behavioral problems. Anybody here work with children or people with behavioral problems? Like I assume everyone. So I work with adults, deaf adults. I've been doing that for 30 years. Behavioral problems is the name of the game. I mean, it's just enormous in our field. So we have similar issues we're working with. We all need, in some ways, to be thinking about how do I get this person, child or adult, to be learning the skills that they need to learn. We're going to focus mainly on thinking skills, problem-solving skills, but it's not just that. It's a whole smorgasbord of skills. And the issue of engagement, too. How do we get them involved in learning skills? That's a challenge for teachers. It's a challenge for the mental health field. So I'm going to start out talking about deaf mental health. I call our clinical specialty deaf mental health. I used to call it mental health care or mental health treatment of deaf people. But now I say deaf mental health because I've been making the case with some others for years now that there's so much distinct and special about this work that it really is a separate, unique clinical specialty. It's not just working with deaf people. There's a whole lot of special things you need to know. So I'm going to talk about that. I want to talk about the issue of language challenges, cognitive challenges, how they come up in the mental health field, and then how that bears or relates to deaf education. Then we'll take a break. I'm going to talk to you about collaborative problem solving, which is one excellent, excellent way to help students learn skills. Who's familiar with Ross Green's work in collaborative problem solving? A few of you. A caveat, I am not a spokesperson for Ross Green. I'm not certified. I don't know if he has certification. I'm not speaking for him. So, and I don't think his is the only way to do this. But I think his approach is so excellent that, in fact, when I developed my workbook, this workbook, which some of you have now, this is a staff training manual. It's like, you know, I'm 63 years old. I'm towards the end, really at the end of my professional career. I've been working with deaf people in mental health for over 30 years. And everything that I think I've learned about how to work, what a deaf mental health program should look like, and how to engage and work with clients, I've put into here. It's 12 lessons for staff. Oops. It's designed to be a very easy read. And I drew a lot on, go back to the beginning. I have to watch my hands and not click this before I'm ready. I found Ross Greene's work enormously helpful. And so I'm going to spend some time dwelling on that and talking to you about some of his core concepts. I hope you'll see how immediately relevant it is. And then I'm hoping we'll have time, though, to go on from there. I want to show you his work, but his is not the only approach. There are quite a number of ways to work on helping students develop skills. He focuses on problem solving, meaning thinking skills. But that's not the only skills we worry. We worry about coping skills, managing how you feel, what you do when you're angry, you're frustrated, you're upset, social skills, how you deal with other people, problem-solving skills, conflict resolution skills, communication skills. So there are a number of approaches, and I think it is enormously helpful. I say this to mental health counselors all the time. Learn about approaches to developing skills. Learn many, because when you have a big toolbox, I can take this here, I can take this here, I can take this here, and I believe it's directly pertinent to teaching. So that's the plan for the day. All right, so some vocabulary. Well, Brett's working on that. Language deprivation. That word's going to come up a lot. There are many ways to sign language deprivation. The concept is also controversial. Some people are offended by the notion of language deprivation because nobody goes into this work with the intention of depriving deaf children of language. And sometimes it's difficult to use that term because people take offense. But I think when we have to look at the issue of language policy and language approaches as more than just the individual decisions of a particular parent or teacher, because we have language policy. What medical people say, cochlear implant people say, do they say, don't let your child have exposure to sign language? When people get that advice, we're talking about social policy and to some degree educational policy. So I think the language deprivation is a fair term. The way I would suggest signing it is language withhold, not take away, but language withhold, like that. Also, the term language disfluency is going to come up. And many of you probably know, usually when the word disfluency is used, it refers to stuttering. And I'm not using disfluency to refer to stuttering. I'm using it as a general term for language problems. When a native user of a language watches somebody who's communicating and can see it's not good, whatever the language is. It's not clear. There's missing grammatical features. It's messy. You know when you're talking to someone who doesn't know your language. And we would say that person is defluent. Poor language users. I think there's no great way to sign that either. I said to the interpreters, if you just sign language not fluent. For my purposes, I think that's okay, although I recognize there are other ways to do it. Okay? So I wanted to say a little bit about me. Of course, I'm hearing, and people always want to know, how did you get involved in working with deaf people? I started learning sign language when I was 23. I had already graduated from college, and I was a history major. Not a lot of jobs, but at the time, this is in the 1970s, I wasn't really worried about that. Different economy, different time. I got a job as an assistant teacher working with multiply handicapped children. Some of them were deaf. I started learning sign language. It became an interest. And like many hearing people in the field, it's sign language that pulled me in, the fascination of sign language. Eventually, after I took my first sign language classes, I realized I had to go to where the language is used. I moved to DC. I just went to Gallaudet and looked for any job I could get. I got a job as a secretary just to be there for a year. I worked there as a secretary. And then I went to graduate school there for my master's. At the time, there was no mental health program, mental health counseling program. This is 1980, a long time ago. And, but there was a VR counselor, vocational rehabilitation program. So I became a vocational rehabilitation counselor at Gallaudet. Over the years, I think I've done pretty much everything you can do in the mental health field. Brett?
Can you put that on presentation mode?
Oh. Put this on presentation mode. Slideshow. I started out as a VR counselor. In 1986, the opportunity came up to set up a deaf psychiatric inpatient unit at a state hospital in Massachusetts. A colleague and I got that job. I was completely untrained and unprepared for that job, but I ended up working there a total of 17 years. And most of my writing and what I have to say came from what I learned of 17 years of working in a deaf psychiatric inpatient unit. But I've worked elsewhere. I've worked in private practice. I've worked in multiple counseling programs. I've worked in a community. A lot of the patients at Westboro eventually closed in 2010. A lot of the patients moved into community programs. I worked with them in the community, group homes, some in apartments, working on helping them adjust to living in the community. That program also set up what I believe is the only mental health respite program. The way we sign respite is break. And what it is it's a program, it's a house in the community for deaf people who are really struggling, who need more help than individual therapy, but really shouldn't be in a hospital. So it's a place they could have 24/7 support and not go into a hospital. And also for people in the hospital, a big problem for people in the hospital is how to get out of the hospital. So we needed a middle step, so it's also a step-down program. So people who are ready to leave the hospital but not ready to go home could go through that intermediate step. That program is still going on, run by an agency, an excellent agency called Advocates. I also worked in the emergency room doing psychiatric evaluations. So again, you hear my voice. I apologize for that. That will go on all day, the wavering voice. So I feel like I have a pretty good grounding in the mental health field. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the world that I entered in 1980 when I started this. Just my reference point, when I began, I didn't know what I was stepping into in terms of the deaf world. So I moved to Gallaudet. I got a job there. At that time, 1980, well, I think that for most of the 20th century, sign language was forbidden in deaf schools. Through the total communication movement of the 1970s, it came back. By 1980, total communication was pretty well established. At that time, that usually meant signing and speaking at the same time, also called simultaneous communication. But it could mean many things. It really is supposed to mean whatever works. In practice, it usually means signing and speaking at the same time. The interest in ASL as a language was spreading. That was, of course, a discovery of a linguist in the 1960s, William Stokoe. By 1980, that idea was pretty well established. ASL is a language, and the deaf culture and deaf community, that idea was becoming much more disseminated in the deaf community and to hearing people. However, it hadn't really hit the mental health field yet. So if you look at what mental health counseling was of deaf people in 1980, there were a few programs, one or two small books, but really nothing written on the subject, just about nothing. And what was available was entirely from what we call the medical pathological model. Now, you may know this book, we call the Green Book. This is the first true American Sign Language grammar book. Who's familiar with the Baker and Coakley books? Okay, just a few. I'm actually surprised. That book came out in 1980 while I was at Gallaudet. When I started learning sign language in the late 70s, there were no ASL texts. There were texts that called themselves ASL, but they weren't. They were basically Pidgin Sign English or English. And then the linguistic study of ASL caught up and got actually into a grammatical text in 1980. And I remember being at Gallaudet when when they made their switch from Pidgin Sign Language teaching to ASL teaching. In fact, my husband was in the first class where he started out learning sign language much, much differently than I did. So it was really a revolution in thinking about how we teach ASL. Unfortunately, I had already started in the 70s, and I already had bad PSE habits because I didn't start, and I've spent the good part of my life since trying to break them. So But the question of mental health counseling with deaf people, the model, how do you think about that? People thought about it from a disability perspective. What is deafness? Deafness is sensory deprivation. So if you're going to do counseling with deaf people, you're helping them adjust, adapt, deal with sensory deprivation, deal with that problem, right? That's how counselors would think about it. If you actually took, though, the notion of, no, wait a second, let's not look at the deafness as a medical pathology, but look at it as cultural difference. That's a very, very different way to think about deaf people. And so the first thing I worked on in this field, I started doing this while I was in graduate school. It took a few more years with a colleague to produce this first book. This book is about this thought experiment. Let's assume that when we think about deaf people, we only apply the cultural model, and we just get rid of any notion of deafness as a disability. If we approach deaf people as culturally different, how does that impact how we do counseling and psychotherapy? That means we have to think about, well, what other models do we have for counseling and psychotherapy with people who are language minorities or other minorities? So we took so it delved into the approach of working with oppressed groups, marginalized groups, minority groups, said, let's take those concepts and apply them to work with deaf people and start to create this notion of culturally affirmative mental health care of deaf people. I think that notion of culturally affirmative mental health care is pretty widespread, at least in mental health programs right now. Most people, I think, use that term. My second book, a few years later, was when I actually had the challenge of trying to create a culturally affirmative mental health program, again, with a colleague, but as a hearing person. So this book, the Westboro State Hospital experience, where I worked in that inpatient program, got into this book. And it's about creating culturally affirmative programs, mental health programs, and that struggle. And I would say my first 10, 15 years of presentations and work in this field was very much wrapped into how do we move from the medical pathological to the cultural model of deaf people and have that impact mental health care. So let me stop right here just for 5 minutes. I'm curious. I know you're teaching, a group of teachers mostly, but if I said to you culturally affirmative teaching or culturally affirmative mental health care for deaf people, and of course understanding it's always deaf plus, other minority groups, other issues, our identities are complex. What comes to mind to you if you think of trying to do something culturally affirmative? So now I'm going to ask the audience, so we got to just pay attention. Anyone have thoughts on that? If you would raise your hand, and then I'll have to bring the mic to you and make sure we're communicating appropriately. Culturally affirmative. If I want my work to be culturally affirmative, or I want this program to be culturally affirmative for deaf people, what does that mean, or what might it mean? Okay, so hold on. Are you going to speak or sign? By the way, anyone who participates, your voice, if you speak, will be on the tape, but Brett is not filming you. He's only filming me and the interpreters.
I'm not sure what it means, but I think a place to start would be for our students to be investigating with their parents and with the other adults in the same culture some things that would be different that they've noticed that we could address as, embrace, incorporate, just some way of starting to gather information about what the culture incorporates or what the culture believes, anything, what differences they see and how that would influence us. But I don't have the next answer.
Okay, so you're saying, well, if you're working with a young child and a family, maybe you would hope that they would look into the deaf community and the deaf culture, educate themselves, and begin to bring those concerns into the schooling, into the planning for the child. Okay? Are you going to speak or sign? I'm also going to try not to trip over anything. One reason for this second table here is there's a big plug underneath there, and I've already tripped over it a few times.
One of the things that we've done just along with that is having deaf people from the community, other parents or friends of parents who are deaf that we know, come in and invite parents in to talk with them about their experiences growing up and how the parents could start getting them involved in other deaf community events.
Very nice. So you try to expose hearing families and hearing children to hopefully successful, competent deaf role models, so they're less afraid and they're more willing to think about, oh, maybe this is okay. And how can maybe the deaf community and deaf people are actually resources for us right now. Very nice. Speak or sign? Speak.
Hi. So I recently went on an interview to explore an opportunity to work in a medical setting instead of a school setting, and I'm a social worker. And I knew that it wasn't going to work out because of this concept where the person who was interviewing me said to me that they view deafness as a health disparity and that a child is not should not be able to choose deaf culture. As babies can't choose deaf culture, was what she said. And it was difficult for me to reconcile that opinion in my mind. Yeah, Kelly's laughing. Appropriate response. It was difficult to reconcile in my mind because, well, none of us can choose our culture, but we can legitimize that there are cultural options and cultural choices that people are able to make, and I kind of came back with the comment that several of us know people who, for example, have gotten cochlear implants and live between worlds without a culture, and as a result struggled. And so it was a challenge. And so I knew that I said, no, I need to recognize that the culture is real, and that's part of my duty as a person who isn't part of that culture, but I need to legitimize.
So I would say that you're addressing the attitudinal dimension of culturally affirmative work, that we have to address and get people to look at biases, prejudices that hearing people bring to this work that they don't know they have. In addition to that, there's a knowledge dimension. Okay, this person just said something incredibly uninformed. How do I educate? How do I respond? Especially if this person is a doctor and I'm just a social worker and they don't, whatever. What's some appropriate responses to that? Let's take one or two more. Oh, we're going to sign. Okay, hold on.
I'm going to sign.
Do you need this?
Yeah, the
Yes.
interpreter will make that. Okay.
I feel that in general, I realize many teachers try their best, but in general, deaf culture is never taught to deaf children in school. And the teachers themselves are not involved in deaf culture anyway. So I think that's also a big issue.
Yeah. And let me respond to you. So you're talking to me.
Oh. So now, you mean now or all along? No one is teaching children about deaf culture? Yes, the curriculum is out there, but nobody is using it. Deaf culture should be taught starting in pre-K and above, so good point.
Let's take one more. You can see already, I'm glad to see a discussion happening. This could be all day, this whole issue. There's so much there in this. Okay, you, and then we'll move on.
So something that I'm a therapist.
Okay.
I work in Jacksonville, and something that I've been talking about since basically the start of my career was about the intense lack of cultural competency in mental health care. When I was working on my bachelor's degree, I was actively seeking out local therapists that work as culturally competent as we could be, given that I'm a hearing person who knows sign, but I am not going to be fully culturally competent because I do not have the same life experiences, and I'm not a deaf person. And I was blown away at the utter lack of mental health providers who speak sign language in Jacksonville, given that it houses the deaf school for the state. There just simply aren't anybody in Jacksonville that signs along with providing mental health care. And so that was my goal when I was working on my bachelor's degree, was I was going to work towards my LCPC, and then I was going to get my interpreting license and work with deaf individuals. So I think that working on being culturally affirmative, I've seen even in our own office how aggravating it is for our deaf clients who see other individuals in my office that don't sign. And then on top of that, our corporate heads are expecting us to use the VR instead of an interpreter, and that aggravates me even more.
Yeah.
So
excellent. You're talking about the really important question of cultural competence. If you go to the field of working, let's say white people working with African Americans, men working with women, non-gay people working with gay, lesbian, bisexual, transsexual, etc. What does cultural competence look like? And then what does cultural competence look like in working with deaf people? In fact, so these first two books, that we were groping for that, but there aren't recognized standards all over, especially when you get beyond the most obvious issue, which is you have to be able to sign. That is so hard to get to that point. Deaf people obviously do better, but it's an issue sometimes with deaf people too. Competent signing, especially if we start looking at language variety, competent signing with a variety of people with different language abilities, that is such a huge challenge that we often don't even get to all the other issues, like the attitudinal issues, the other knowledge-based issues, the other skill-based issues. Nice point. Last point. Sign.
Okay, the psychotherapy in general in hospitals and clinics throughout Illinois, I'm one of the very few providers who happens to be deaf, and it is important that okay, excuse me, we're going to need to go back.
Deaf people, you have to sign here. Deaf people are living and breathing the deaf culture by being deaf. So there are a lot of models that are set up that don't apply to this topic. It's unique. And really important to us is to keep open minds related to deafness, and that will start everything going in motion. Your point is that deaf people themselves are the experts on their lives. Yes, they have experienced everything as a deaf person, because I've seen so many therapists in general who make a lot of assumptions and do not fully appreciate the deaf experience. So I believe your second point is, I believe, is that many of our therapy practices do not fit well, and they have to be adjusted. And how that adjustment is made, people often don't know how to do that. And maybe people have an instinct on how to do it, and the therapist learned academically, and when they try to apply it, it doesn't often match because they don't have the experience.
So, thank you. Very nice points. And so the first 10, 15 years of my life was really immersed in this. These discussions with other people, really trying to get these ideas fleshed out a lot in the mental health world. Now, an interesting thing, one of the things it meant for us when we set up the Westboro Deaf Unit, this is 1986, it was set up by two hearing people, and I was a VR counselor. So I was clearly unqualified. The fact that they hired the two of us, I think was an indication of how few qualified, even semi or remotely qualified candidates there were. So we got the job, but we shouldn't have gotten the job. But anyway, one of the reasons we got the job is because we sold this idea of culturally affirmative work. So we wanted to create a program. It meant to us having a signing environment, lots of deaf staff, lots of hearing staff who can sign, communication specialists, sign language classes, deaf culture, a positive attitude about deafness. It meant all of those things. And we thought at the time that if we could provide a rich sign language environment with ASL, that itself would be curative. That what we needed to do is have a rich ASL signing environment. So that was our first few years, and we began then, after time, to learn some harder lessons. We started to pay much more attention after a while to who our patients were. What were their characteristics? What were their language skills and language deficits? And in this last 10 years of the program, we became very, very focused on who we were serving and what it took to serve them. So my thinking moved away from the whole issue of culturally affirmative, although that's always been important to me, to language fluency and language problems. Now the way that happens is we did some research. I am going to point to some things on the slide. You don't have to read it. But we did a study of every patient that we served over 7 years. There were 94 patients. And we had done communication assessments on all of them. These were sign language assessments of their communication skills in sign. We didn't have great tools. They weren't wonderful assessments, but they were good enough to help us see some clear problems and clear patterns. The book that I ended up writing as a result of this research is this green book. And I'm going to just cite some of the things that we found. First of all, functional level. When we looked at our clients, their functional level, we used a tool called the Allen cognitive level. It's roughly like an intelligence test, but it's probably less biased. And it's something an occupational therapist use. So this was the mean, the average client, the mean level of skill of our clients. These are adult clients, need help with transportation. More than half of our patients can't take a bus on their own or a train on their own. Need supervision taking medicine. Need help planning a meal, shopping, cooking. Need help recognizing dangers in the environment. Some of them we worried about crossing the street. They're adults. Reminders to wash and dress appropriately. Supervision with money. In other words, wow, we were working with some people with very significant life skill limitations. This didn't seem like an average, that these were people with average level skills. They seemed to be much lower than the hearing patients in the hospital. We also looked, I know not all of you can see this clearly, we looked at diagnoses, and we found we had this one finding in here which is really important and very consistent with every other study that's been done of deaf people in psychiatric hospitals. And I've read all the studies, and they cite them in the book. We were comparing our deaf patients, 94 that we saw over 7 years, to 180 hearing patients that were seen at the hospital at one point in time. Clearly, there were far more hearing patients in the hospital than deaf patients. Almost 90% of the hearing patients had a psychotic diagnosis, usually schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, some kind of very, very severe mental illness. Only a third of our patients did. Most of our patients we did not think had schizophrenia or anything that severe. That's a huge difference. 33 compared to 90, and that is consistent with every other person who's done this work. I go through it study by study in the book. The other thing is developmental challenges. That refers to people who have a diagnosis of what we used to call mental retardation. We no longer use that word, or autism spectrum. But we found that the number of people with those diagnoses was much higher than it was in the hearing hospital. And in fact, that number could have been far higher because we screened out, we didn't admit, we had many, many referrals of people with diagnoses of some kind of autism, of mental retardation that we, again, I apologize for use of the word, but that's the word we used at the time, that we didn't admit. If we also started considering language and other kind of developmental challenges, that number would be through the roof. In other words, we had far, far more people with developmental problems that began in childhood that are going on now in adulthood. We also saw a much more variety of diagnosis. Now, in communication skills, this is based on the assessments that we were done at the time, the really key finding here, again, I wouldn't go to the bank based on the quality of our communication assessments. They were not, we didn't have tools. We didn't have ASL tools that we could use that were validated. But we saw enough people, and we also filmed a lot of the people we saw with their permission. We filmed and we would sit down as a communication team and we'd say, what's going on linguistically? Because this person doesn't seem to be using ASL in any kind of standard way. What's going on? We saw we had problems. In fact, we found that it was in the opinion of our communication specialists, validated by the interpreting team, that 2/3 of our patients could not be said to have native language abilities in any language. In sign language would be their best language usually, but they didn't have it in any language. Now, we saw a number of problems very consistently. Most obvious one was limitations of vocabulary, or words, limited vocabulary, incorrectly used vocabulary. We saw something that came up over and over again, and I'm curious, I know you're working mostly with children. When I talk to people who work with adults, I say, do you see this? People are signing, but they're not making clear references to time. So they don't seem, so if I just say, one of the things I do when I do an assessment, I say, tell me a story. Tell me, how did you get here? What happened to you? And what I'm listening for is, can they tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end? Which has, because that's how stories are structured. How did it start? What happened? How did it end? And I'm talking to people, and all the time we would find ourselves going, did this happen? When did this happen? Or are you talking about something that you are afraid will happen? Something that just happened? Something that happened a long time ago? The concept of time seems to be weak or absent. And we saw that over and over again. And we're really struck by that. Anyone else seen things like that? People can't quite. Now, this isn't an ASL problem, because ASL handles time and tense differently than English. But competent ASL users have no trouble organizing, creating a story, or presenting information in time accurately. But our patients couldn't do it. Interesting also, we also find, ASL often has a topic comment structure. Store I went to, something like that. You set up what you're talking about, then you comment on it. Not all the time, but a lot. But we would talking to people, and it's not clear who they're talking about. They seem to leave out the pronoun. I'm talking about Joe, or if they or something, and they would start talking, but it's not clear what. Not clear who or what they're talking about. Well, I always give this example of one person I worked with all the time. I'm going to sign what he would sign to me all the time. He would go, what is this? What is this? And I'd go, who, what? And he couldn't quite, this could be a classifier, it could be a group, 5 people, a group of people, something coming up, or he'd do this, but he would never say, my neighbor came up. The person would be missing. And we find a lot of our times going, who are you talking about? The establishment of subject, and then subject verb, who did what to whom. Very basic language structure seems to be absent a lot of the time. So we would spend an enormous amount of time just trying to get the story. What happened? We're not working with competent ASL users. We're working with very, very disfluent communicators, and that had great bearing on their ability to, for instance, use therapy. Because what do you do in therapy? You tell a story. You tell a series of stories. What happened to you? Therapy is all about the use of stories. So when I'm starting out with people, the very first thing I'm looking for is, can they tell a story? Because if they can't, it's going to have to alter tremendously what I do. That's ultimately where I came to developing this book, because I found that we had to come up with this notion of pre-therapy. How do we work with people who can't quite tell a story yet? Lots of other problems. Related to poor use of time was problems with cause and effect. I don't know if you've ever seen this. A causes B. Ever work with people who do something and don't understand the impact it has on other people? Like every day, right? Right? Children, but I worked with adults who would do something very violent. And then, they would threaten or scare or do something, and you would say, how does that person feel? And they couldn't answer the question. It didn't enter their mind to consider that their behavior had an impact on something else, or that if they do something, it could have a consequence. Cause and effect. We found that a lot. And of course, not only cause and effect, but consideration of possibilities. Conditional statements. If A, then B or C. Consider possibilities. You want to do problem solving, brainstorming? You have to have that structure. If A, then B or C. And not only that, you have to say B, how's B pro and B con? C, pro and con. Let's evaluate the different options. But what if you don't have that linguistic capacity yet because your language skills aren't developed enough? Then when you get to problem solving, which you want to do as a teacher or you want to do as a counselor, oh my goodness, this person hasn't learned the very basics of identifying that there's a problem, naming the problem, considering the possible impact of the problem, considering options, evaluating options, choosing between options. That structure isn't in their brain yet. And we would work with adults who have this problem. They had linguistic deprivation and other issues, and now there are adults functioning very, very poorly in the world. And that's what got them into the hospital, not schizophrenia, but this very, very poor language challenges and other challenges which created adults who are just completely unprepared for life. I'm seeing people nodding. You know what I'm talking about, even though you're working mostly with children. Okay. So we began to think about what's going on here, and we began to particularly ask the question, a hospital unit is filled with these patients, deaf patients, who seem to have a set of characteristics that are different than the hearing patients. The whole question is, why is deaf mental health a field? Well, one question is, are there any unique clinical syndromes that deaf people are subject to that hearing people are not subject to? I think there is one big one. And that's the one I'm telling you about right now. Now, when I went through the literature, I went through a whole bunch, all the studies. I'm not going to bore you by going through one by one, because I also don't have the time. They're all cited in here, but I'm going to summarize them for you. Basically, wherever there were deaf inpatient units or programs, and you can't, if you want to do research on deaf people who are in mental health settings, they have to be all in one place. If you've got one deaf person and you have no expertise, you don't have any research. It's one of the reasons we don't have good research on deaf prisoners, because the only place that I know of that actually has deaf prisoners grouped together is Texas. And because of that, there's no research on that. Although from Texas, we got some good studies about deaf people in prison and what's going on with them, who they are. But only because they're all they're all grouped together. So anyway, we found that in study after study, people kept saying, well, all these programs where people did do research, that they say there's a group of our deaf patients that seem different than the hearing patients. And that people came up, tried to define what's different about them, and they tried to name it. And they came up with a whole bunch of very terrible names. So one of the first names they came up with primitive personality. Yuck, right? Who wants to be diagnosed as having a primitive personality? But that's a notion that's been in the field a lot. Or psychosis with mental deficiency. An early researcher came up with this notion of surdophrenia, surdophrenia, which was assumed to be a personality structure associated with early acquired deafness. There is no such thing as a personality structure associated with deafness. But there is this clinical syndrome that we see a lot that we have to account for. It's also been called inadequate personality, another great diagnosis, right? I hate to tell you this, you've got inadequate personality. Borderline syndrome is another one. Here's some other hospitals. In England, they thought problems related to deafness, that's not so bad. Developmental disorders of communication. What we often see in the mental health field, people know what the DSM is, right? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's what we use to come up. That's our book of diagnoses. And in the DSM, there have been many versions of it, but there's something called NOS, not otherwise specified. What is NOS? It means you don't know. It means, so if we say pervasive developmental disorder, think autism or something like that, NOS, but not really, a little different. I mean, it's a fancy way for saying it seems to be a little different. We haven't quite figured it out. Lots in the mental health field, you look at the diagnostic sheet, you see NOS, personality disorder NOS, psychosis NOS, communication disorder NOS, schizophrenia NOS. I mean, you just see it all the time, which basically an admission that psychiatrists are recognizing something different is here, but we don't quite have a name for it. So anyway, all these studies said, in their own words, the same thing. They said, when we look at our clientele, we see a group that we don't see with hearing people. Number one, we see very, very severe language problems. No native language skills. That's huge. No native language skills. Number two, very, very severe behavioral problems. Is there a connection between poor language skills and behavior problems? Is there a connection? You know there is. Behavior is communication. Yes. Behavior is communication. The problems were evident from early childhood. It's a developmental problem. Didn't just appear in adulthood. It's a developmental problem. And in all domains, at home, in school, at work, the problems follow the person. It's not just a school problem, not just a home problem. There seems to be lots of developmental deficits for things the person didn't learn. And what we call fund of information or world knowledge, huge gaps in what the person knows. And we don't think they have schizophrenia or psychotic. That's not it. Although easy to misdiagnose them, if you know what you're doing, you say, no, that's not it. Now, interesting, I started out as a VR counselor. And in the VR field in the 1990s and 80s, when I was working more that, there was something, we used to use the term, first for a while it was called low-functioning deaf. Nobody likes that term, low-functioning deaf. The VR field came out and said, no, we can't use that, that's stigmatizing. So they say, we're going to call it traditionally underserved deaf. And that term, anyone heard that term? Traditionally underserved? That's a 1990s term in the VR field. There are lots of articles about traditionally underserved deaf. Who are they? Actually, it's the same group, just in a VR setting. Deaf people with inadequate language skills, that's the hallmark. Vocational problems, behavioral problems, social adjustment problems, independent living problems. In the VR field, again, forgive me for this, it's very unprofessional to be sucking on lozenges. Even worse would be chewing gum, and I thought about doing that because gum chewing helps too. But I apologize, it really does help me breathe. The problem we saw as VR counselors was not that usually that people, these would be people working in unskilled jobs like housekeeping, cleaning, cooking, something like that, unskilled cooking. The problem was almost never that the person couldn't learn the job. The problem was that they couldn't get along with their supervisors and the other colleagues, and they didn't show up on time, and they didn't dress appropriately, and they took offense easily, and they blew up on the job, and they had all these social problems. And we could train people to do data entry, but then what do you do when the boss comes up to you and says, you can't drink while you're working, and the person gets up and hits the boss or something like that? Those kind of problems, that would be the type of thing that VR counselors would be struggling with. The lack of appropriate social skills and self-awareness. So I looked at all this and I came up with my own diagnosis, very wordy diagnosis. I was trying to avoid primitive personality disorder. I was trying to come up with something neutral. So I came up with language disfluency with deficiencies in behavioral, social, and emotional adjustment. It takes a long time just to say it. And ultimately, that's not what we're going with, because Sanjay Gulati, who's this guy, he's a deaf psychiatrist I worked with him for many years, he works in New England. He came up with this notion of language deprivation syndrome. And I think that's what we're going to stick with, because it's neat and much clearer. In this book, if you're interested, if you go to this YouTube link, he has a presentation in Sign where he explains language deprivation syndrome. Many people have seen this presentation. I recommend it to you. I also got him to write a book chapter on language deprivation syndrome, and I think that's the best summary of what we know about the field. So I'm going to summarize it now for you. Let me see, we got till. So I'm going to summarize here, the first place where we're going to skip a lot, because I want to get to making some connections with education. His sense of what's going on with language deprivation syndromes, beginning with very, very common language deficits. Lots of people now more and more people are studying what are the sign language actual abilities of signing deaf people that they're working with. It's interesting also that the interpreting field is now finally doing this. Because if you think about it, interpreters are trained to go from one language to another, from English to French, from English to ASL. But the presumption always is that the person is a competent language user of some language. But now what interpreters are seeing more and more is that the deaf clientele, the deaf people they're working with, are not competent signers, and they're not competent spoken language users. Some of that is long-standing problems, but a lot of it has to do with the changes in deaf education, the loss of deaf schools and quality deaf signing programs, so that deaf children now are growing up and they're not given ASL. And as much as we might want to think that because they got a cochlear implant, now they're hearing people, they're not. And so they're not signing competently, and they're not speaking competently. And so what interpreters are now grappling with is, oh my goodness, most of the deaf people, a larger and larger percentage of the deaf people we're interpreting for, are actually not competent language users. What does the interpreter do with that when the person is not clear themselves, or when you can't explain a concept to them because they literally don't have the words for it in their own language? So if you think about, some of you may know the program in Alabama, the Mental Health Interpreter Training Program in Alabama. It's the first place where the interpreters, this is through the Office of Deaf Services in Alabama, where they start training interpreters to work with disfluent sign language. Northeastern University in Boston now has the Center for Atypical Sign Language. They have a training online program for interpreters. I was involved in certain aspects of creating it. And where interpreters are learning online strategies for working with disfluent language. And they actually did one of the best studies so far of what they call atypical signers, common language problems that are seen. So I'm going to go real briefly. What kind of language problems are we talking about? Sign language problems when people are not competent signers. Again, we could spend lots of time on this, and I apologize. I need to go through it quickly. First, you see things like in ASL, they're not using space. Just a simple thing like, I help, I help. Or people like this, the use of the visual field. Well, you have to learn that. You learn that from ASL users, the whole spatial dimension of ASL. Non-manual markers, no facial expression, no grammatical facial expression. Where would you get to? You only get that from watching native signers. If you're not exposed to native signers, you don't learn to use your face grammatically. What we saw, no references, no pronouns. The problem of this, person coming up with this, but never explaining what this is. That's a language disfluency problem. If somebody said to you in English, came up to you, you would say, what? Who? What? That's not enough information. The same thing if I said to you, 3 big ones. Disfluent. It's not enough information. Well, we get a lot of signing that's like a 3 big. Know that? Over there. That's not good signing. That's not good communication. Of course, classifiers, things like grammatical structures, classifiers, important grammatical structure often missing. Temporal, again, this is the finding I feel most confident about, because whenever I go to people who do my work and I say, the clients you have, do you ever find yourself going, when did that happen? And find that they couldn't tell you? I get this. Yep, you're not alone. That's a consequence of language deprivation. That's not normal. Deaf people who grow up in deaf families don't have that problem. Shorter, less complex references, lack of verb inflection. You know what I mean by verb inflection. You know, I give to you, I give to, he gives to her, or I give to each of you, or I give to all of you. That verb inflection. Those type of things are absent. Related to that, now you get to the cognitive consequences. Poor time and tense use, cause and effect, if this then that, poor problem solving. You begin to see now where we're going, because mental health providers are working with people with all these problems, language and cognitive problems, and they don't have the structures in their brain or the skills that you would normally use in counseling or therapy. And I bet it's the same in teaching. Because you're there and somehow you have to help them develop language and cognitive skills and get a fund of information and all that stuff. And it all begins with language. Lack of problem-solving skills, of course the ability to think abstractly. You know, what is abstract thinking? The ability to see patterns. A and B are alike, but different than C. Very foundation. In counseling you want to say, your behavior now and your behavior yesterday, similar, different, which? Your father grow up, do what? You today, do what? Similar, different, which? You think, you feel this. You feel what? Similar? Thinking affect feeling, feeling affect thinking. What do you think? Standard stuff. That's counseling 101. But what if the person doesn't have the ability to make those connections? Okay. Then there's, related to that, you know, as teachers, theory of mind, right? I have to learn that you think too. I think, but you think and you feel different than me. Theory of mind, the ability to appreciate that somebody else has a different perspective. We have research showing that deaf people with language deprivation are delayed, very, very significantly delayed sometimes in appreciating that other people have different points of view. That even, what's a point of view? That's even that. What's a point of view? Think different than me. And the way they think can be valid too. I'm sure you've seen that. How does Joe feel? How does Joe think? That's even far more complex question. But just how does Joe feel? And if you have theory of mind difficulties, that means you're almost certainly going to have difficulties with empathy. Appreciating, you know, how when you do something, it has an impact on other people. Ever see that? People don't get it. So we have, and over time, the lack of empathy becomes a very significant behavioral problem. Poor fund of information, not knowing, you know, again, I think you know what this is. I can give you lots of examples, but I want to move on quickly. In the book here, Galati cites in the research on, I think, every deaf child that he was evaluating in Children's Hospital. And he says pretty much all the time, language deficits and behavioral problems are very powerfully correlated. You can't say cause and effect, but it's pretty strong correlation. Both dangerous to oneself and dangerous to others are strongly correlated with language disfluency and language deprivation. In other words, when deaf children are not getting exposed adequately to any language they can acquire as a native user, when the cost of not having a native language is very, very likely to be, you know, failure in many, many domains, but also violence to yourself and violence to others. There was a recent study in the Journal of Adara, which I found really interesting. It was it was one of the very few places where they actually took into consideration the age of acquisition of sign language skills. And they're looking at the prevalence of suicidal behavior in a population of deaf substance abuse. You know, how often are people with substance abuse disorders in a deaf substance abuse program? How often are they suicidal? But they included the variable of age of exposure to sign language. And they found that if they were exposed to sign language after age 10, they were far more likely to become suicidal later in life. That is a wow finding. And it also raises the question of what research we haven't done. Every time we're looking at something, do we include the variable of age of acquisition of sign language? Or quality of sign, do we include a measure of sign language abilities? And see, does that correlate with anything else? Because we have good reason to think that it does. So because of time, I'm going to skip a whole lot and try to make connections now to deaf education. I put down what I think are enduring truths about educating deaf children. So you guys can tell me whether you think I'm right or wrong in this. I'm not a teacher of deaf children. First thing, language development is the fundamental challenge of deaf education. It is now, it always has been. Number two, language development is connected to everything else. Anything you want to accomplish as a teacher or as a counselor depends on language skills. We spend an enormous amount of time trying to develop language skills. You want to teach someone to think, the problem-solving skills, they have to have language. There's no way to do it without that. Can you think, by the short digression, do you think you can think without language about a squirrel in a tree? How many people think that you can have no language and just see something we call a squirrel in something we call a tree and look at it and somehow have some image, some mental processing about that? Can you do that without language? Who says yes? How many would say yes? How many would say no, you can't? And some of you are just thinking about it for the first time. I think it doesn't require language to think about there's something there, it's in the tree, it's moving around, it's going up, it's going down. That doesn't require, you can do that. You can think about things without language. But as soon as you go, what is that? Why is it, why? What's the name for that? And what is the name that thing it's in? And why is it there? And what does it mean? And do other things go up and down in trees? And can I go up in a tree? And obviously, you can't go far without language. You need language to do any kind of processing about what things mean. Early interventions. I'm sure, how many of you are involved in early intervention? Right? Early intervention, good. We all know it's a good thing. Quality early intervention with deaf children. It can help. It often does help. It's highly recommended. But even with quality early intervention, deaf children remain at considerable disadvantage for language development throughout childhood, even with really good. Early intervention helps. It doesn't solve the problem of language delays. Deaf children of signing deaf parents, I would say competently signing deaf parents, have a clear advantage over other deaf children in language and cognitive development. That finding has been around for years. Deaf children, native users of sign language, clear advantage, starting out in school. But there is a but. There is a but. Even that group, and when you look at spoken language skills and literacy skills, reading skills, they also lag behind hearing peers. And recent research, sorry to say, the most recent book on the subject by Mark Marshak, some of you may know his name, he's written like 10 million books on deaf education. Mark Marshak, M-A-R-S-C-H-A-R-K. The advantage that comes from being in a deaf child in a deaf family may disappear by the time you get to high school, or severely decrease. It's more an advantage in early elementary school and becomes less so in high school, apparently. Anyway, most deaf children with cochlear implants, we know the results are highly variable. Some do well, no question about it. But most deaf children with cochlear implants, they do not become hearing children. They still have, do not learn language the way hearing children learn language. Most deaf children in, quote, signing school environments, that has to be in quotes, signing school environments, are not receiving natural sign language, they're not receiving quality ASL. What they receive is all over the place. I live in Massachusetts. The neighboring town is the Learning Center for Deaf Children. Some of you may know it. Possibly, it's clearly one of the best schools for deaf in the country. It's a bilingual program. I know they get quality ASL there. And I also know that most of the children have cochlear implants. And they're getting quality ASL. In my mind, that's the way to do it. But a signing environment can be a parent with a 10 to 50 signs, or a teacher that much, or an interpreter who's really has, you know, and the skills of interpreters are all over the place too. So we say signing environment, but really what's the quality of the signing the person is exposed to? They're not usually receiving anything comparable to what a hearing child receives in terms of natural language exposure. So regardless of educational method or provision of cochlear implants, the majority of deaf children lag substantially behind hearing children in spoken language skills, and especially in reading. That's not a surprise to you, right? You see that all the time. Importantly, this can't be said enough. There is no good evidence that sign language exposure hurts acquisition of spoken language skills. There is no evidence at all, and considerable evidence that exposure to sign language helps the acquisition of language, including spoken language skills. There is no good reason to deprive a deaf child of sign language exposure. Even if the child is going to grow up mainly oral, there's still no reason to deprive the child of sign language. It can only help. It doesn't hurt. It only helps. Maybe it won't help a lot for this person, but it won't hurt. And other people, it will help a lot. Okay, so because of time, let me just try to tie it together, and then we'll break. 10:45 is the break, right? Connections between deaf education and deaf mental health. Number one, in the deaf mental health field, we're increasingly coming to grapple with the consequences of language deprivation and this thing which we're now naming language deprivation syndrome. And because what's different about our work, large numbers of the people we work with who are in mental health programs do not have competent language skills in any language. That is going to dramatically impact how we do psychotherapy with them, if we can do it at all, and how we do counseling. And we have to think about that. Does that have bearing for teachers? Are you dealing with children who are developing language deprivation syndrome right now? You know, can you do anything about it? Or, you know, how can we work together better on trying to overcome that problem? I think when you work in deaf mental health, you must learn a developmental perspective. In other words, I might want you to sit down with me and just tell me the story about what's happened to you and have insight and motivation and all that good stuff. But you developmentally may have the educational cognitive abilities of a preschooler, not a preschooler, of a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old. And I have to notice that and think, okay, my psychotherapy model, I gotta do a lot of adaptation, what this gentleman was saying before. Why does so much of our psychotherapy not easily work with deaf people? Because it's designed for people who have more advanced language skills, more advanced capacities for abstract thinking, more higher levels of functional abilities. We often have to adapt, not just to make things in sign and make things more visual and do active counseling, but we often have to simplify and find ways of making the concepts and the interaction much more clear. Deaf mental health providers, no matter how much we don't want to do it, we have to focus on language and cognitive development, just like you. In fact, in some ways, I think we're really overlapping. The more I do this work, the more I realize I have to be a teacher. I have to be a good teacher, and I have to be thinking about language and cognitive development and other kinds of skill development. I think that's where we overlap. So the world of teaching, what do we know about helping children acquire skills? I think all that body of knowledge is the same body of knowledge that mental health providers have to have, because we all have to do it. So that's a long introduction to what we're going to do next. So let's break, and when you come back, we'll start out by some processing of what I've just talked about, and then we'll go into collaborative problem solving. Let's start with I threw a lot at you, now react. Again, whenever you're in a mixed setting, deaf and hearing, even if it's not being filmed, one of the jobs of the facilitator is always managing communication. Not everyone knows that, but just having an interpreter in the room is not enough. The facilitator has to manage the flow of information to make sure the interpreters can do their job. There's a reasonable pace back and forth. There's equal access to participating. So I'm trying to do that too. That's by the way, I would see as one of the skills under the skill dimension of deaf mental health specialists, managing the communication flow in a mixed group of deaf and hearing people. So I'm trying to do that too. Anyway, Brett, sorry, hold on, wait, turn my mic on. I was going to say wait, for interpreter to catch up, but turn my mic on. Is that good? Hello? Okay. All right, please react, thoughts, and feel free to disagree. Okay, now, so you're going to talk, right? Okay.
I work closely with my hearing kids at the high school, but I also work closely with the multi-need students. And my observation is would it be beneficial for mental health providers that provide for the deaf learn the strategies that the mental health providers use for those with cognitive disabilities as adults, because it seems like they also have a language deprivation, and those strategies would maybe benefit those who are mental health practitioners for the deaf.
So let me react to that. You're saying, would it be helpful for mental health providers who work with deaf people to learn some of the strategies that people have who work with people with cognitive and learning problems? I think so. But again, the issue of, what qualifies you to do this work? And how do you get trained to do this work? And what's the skill set that you need to do this work? I mean, it's not codified anywhere. So if you're someone like me, I started out a long time ago, but I wasn't atypical. I thought you just learn sign language. The rest is the same. It took me about 15, 20 years to really appreciate how much more there was to it. So I believe now, because I'm old and I've been doing this for a long time, that a developmental framework and a focus on teaching psychosocial skills and awareness of a variety of strategies for teaching psychosocial skills and the ability to work with people with cognitive impairments is part of the skill set you need when you work with deaf people. Not because every deaf person has those problems, of course not. You have to work with the range. I work right now in private practice. Private practice world is entirely different. My public sector world, most of my life, I was working with people with these issues. In private sector, one of the things I do in private sector, I have a criteria for who I'll work with in private practice. It's very simple. People call me up and they say, so-and-so needs therapy. I say, have them call me. Have them contact me. Here's my VP number. Here's my email address. You can text me, have them contact me. Why would I say that? Because the ability to call and contact a therapist and say, I want therapy, screens out and a whole lot of people who don't have that fund of information, and tends to just that brings in people who are more able to make use of private practice psychotherapy. The standard referral is, he needs therapy because he has got anger control problems. He has no clue what anger control problems are. He has no clue what therapy is. He doesn't have a sense of using dialogue to do problem solving. And why would he talk to you anyway? Who the hell are you? So, I mean, it's way beyond he needs therapy. There's a lot of preparation, or in my word, pre-therapy, that we have to do before this person can actually sit down with a therapist and make it a useful experience. So I believe that's true, but I don't know that all therapists know this, because again, where would they learn it? You learn it from hard knocks experience. All of us who do this work, I think, I haven't not met a deaf mental health specialist who doesn't tell you stories about the things I learned in school and how they don't work. That's practically, and the reason they don't work is somewhat cultural, but a lot has to do with language and cognitive and developmental challenges that make it difficult to make use of a very sophisticated intervention like psychotherapy. Other comments? Thank you. Speak?
I'm a self-contained teacher of deaf and hard of hearing kids in a day program, and I've been teaching a long, long time. And I think the language deprivation is real, and I think it's actually getting worse because the trends in education now, we just slap something on a kid's head and throw them out in regular ed. And I have to fight for every kid to be in my room and why they're in my room. But I feel like the trends are working against me.
Yes, and you're not alone in thinking that. And so one of the problems that comes up, you have a child in your classroom that you recognize has language delays. Now, I bet the child has attention problems. I bet the child has behavior problems. I bet the child is sometimes aggressive. I bet the child has learning problems. You bring in somebody who's not trained in deaf mental health, it's not rocket science. What diagnoses are they going to come up with? You all know. ADHD, learning disability, oppositional defiant, conduct disorder. If they're more sophisticated, they may say reactive attachment disorder. If they're more sophisticated, they may say that. But, you know, okay, maybe. So what are we going to do? Medication, behavior plans. What are the behavior plans? Consequences. Consequences. In other words, punishment. Well, in the mental health field, that is everywhere. You know, the mental health field is dangerous for deaf people. Deaf people go in the mental health system, what do they get? Medication, too much, often appropriate. Medication is too much medication is a general problem, but deaf people who are served in mental health systems, because people don't know what to do, and the only thing they can offer is medication, you get the standard things. You get people who've got pages full of diagnoses, multiple kinds of medications. The only thing people need to do, know to do, are behavior plans. And I bet that's going on in education. A child with language deprivation will look like a child with ADHD, will look like a child with a learning disability. And where's the consideration of what it means to not have adequately developed language skills? Other comments? Speaking?
So I would agree with what the previous commenter had said, and I agree with what you're saying. And I'm, a social worker, and this is only my 5th year out of school. I'm still kind of going through my trial by fire, learning how to do this. But my question, like sort of the big question, is how, as the mental health provider, do I take all this wealth of information that you're sharing with us and go back to where I work? And how does the teacher go back and communicate that this is a bigger issue? This is a more global issue. This is a program, so should be addressed program-wide. How do we make these things a priority and have these things, these issues and strategies that we need to be using, how do we make those legitimate when we go back to our jobs?
Yeah, people always ask that. In the world where nothing is accessible, nothing is adapted for deaf people, what do I do? I'm just a social worker, I don't have any power. It's always the problem. Later in the discussion, there's a slide on the LEAD, L-E-A-D-K initiative. That's an initiative that's being promoted all over the country to make sure, number one, that deaf children get appropriate language assessments. I think that's where you begin. You need to be able to document this person's language skills at a very early age. First year 1, you need to be able to say it. And they need to be assessments that are both of spoken language and of sign language, so that you have some data to say, look, you don't want to wait till they're 3 or 4 or 5 and they're entering school. They've already missed out on their crucial language learning years. One thing is you push for assessments. And pushing for an assessment, you'll get pushed back against that too. But it's hard to argue that there shouldn't be an appropriate language assessment. I would start there. I would try to connect also to the advocacy efforts that are going on through the people who are promoting the LEAD K initiatives. And then we'd have to go into the world of politics and other things too. But I think the safest place to start with is saying, as a teacher, I need a better language assessment. And that, by the way, in the mental health field, the thing I'm pushing the most in mental health programs, I think the mark of a quality deaf mental health program is a sophisticated communication assessment. Programs that have gone beyond what the simple, he signs, we need a signer to work with him. That is, there's no excuse for that level of primitive thinking at this point in our development. We need a sophisticated language assessment, and then we need to be able to make sure that our teaching or signing teaching communication resources are appropriate for each of the people that we're working with. And that's a larger discussion, but that's where we have to go. 1 or 2 more comments? Speaker sign.
So I was just reflecting, I'm a school social worker, but I also have a background in deaf education. So I've been in the classroom as well. And one of the things that's kind of come up within our team over the past couple years is my goals have really changed from problem solving goals to very much more language-based goals, and acquiring language and paying attention to communication and being able to receptively take in the communication and repeat it back expressively to check for understanding. And I mean, just listening to this is very profound, but it's also involved a lot of discussion with the team, and that, like, yes, this looks like a language goal, but I can't do anything else until I have some language to communicate with these students, and they need to have the understanding that there is language all around them, and they have to pull their attention to who's talking in order to access the language to be educated. So we've really moved a lot social work wise within our program towards more language-based goals.
I think you're also not alone in that. I think that's happening everywhere. And I think it's happening in mental health too, as we get more and more people as adults who aren't competent language users. I often say to people, how do you turn this into a treatment plan? What would be the treatment plan goal? 99% of the time you can say, instead of hitting, person will express him or herself with words or signs. That's kind of all purpose, but often that's what we're working on. Now I want to throw in one more thing under the dimension of cultural competency, and this is on the attitudinal dimension of our work, which can be challenging for people. Do we have the language skills that this person needs? Am I qualified to provide the intervention, teaching, counseling, etc., that this person needs? And suppose they hired me because I sign, because the person who hires me doesn't know the difference between a good signer and a bad signer, and they think signing is signing. What's the problem? And I got in, and I'm very eager. And most of us, the vast majority of us, learn sign language as adults. We're not native users. I'm talking about hearing people who do this work, most of you. Not native users, second language users, struggling often throughout your life to get better and better at sign. Maybe working alone. And also you're expected, if you're the deaf specialist, I was a deaf mental health counselor in several programs. I'm the only one or one of two. The expectation is that whatever deaf person comes along, they're yours, right? No matter the communication issue, no matter the... I ended up working with children only because, not because I wanted to work with children, but because there were deaf children that were referred and I had to do it. How to do couples work, how to do families work, how to do trauma work, how to do substance abuse work. I wasn't trained in any of these things, but you can't screen them out because you're the only one who signed. So we struggle with that. But then, what about the person who you're really not communicating effectively with? In programs, I've always had the luxury in programs, because I've worked in quality programs, I had communication specialists, deaf interpreters. I would say, help! And because of that, I'm used to that, and in Massachusetts, I've had that luxury. But now that I'm working in private practice alone, I think about it much more, because I'll get people that, I'm not sure that I can communicate well. And there may be no one else, but do I take this on? It's a real thing I have to wonder about. Thank you. One other comment or question, and then we'll move on. Yes? I need this.
I have a question about implant.
You want a cough drop?
I do, actually. No, I have a stash of my own.
Oh, you want?
Thank you. I have some under here.
Oh.
Thank you.
Ricola, the best.
Oh, yours are probably better. Anyway, I was looking, kind of thinking about when you were talking about that language barrier, but I'm looking at or thinking about also our implant users, where they would have some kind of like verbal communication, but that deafness and that culture part to any counselor might still be missing. So how do we get implant users to come to somebody who has that deaf culture background. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well,
It's a concern I have just because of
yeah.
the many implant users
So-
that I see.
Right. So the question then really is, how people who are growing up, they're implant users and they haven't been exposed to any sign language. It might be good for them, but they've already thinking of themselves as people who don't sign. I don't need that, and that may actually be limiting them. What can you do about that? I wonder, does anyone else, I mean, that's a big question, and I don't have magic on that. Anyone have any thoughts on that question? How do you, people have already enculturated the culturally hearing bias that sign language is bad, even though they desperately need some sign language exposure. Thoughts on what you might do to push back on that a bit?
I didn't mean to stump the room.
No, no, it's fine. I think I would, if myself, I gently keep pushing. I might just start, maybe I start signing while I talk a little bit. Maybe I'll just throw in a little bit. Maybe I'll just bring somebody else in. I'm just, you know, what do you do with anyone who's closed off from a world they need to be exposed to? What do you do with, let's say you're working with a young homosexual who is completely convinced that that's this horrible sin and is going to hell and all those things, and needs exposure to some other viewpoints in order to live a healthy life, but is closing off from that? You don't just say, we're good. You have to find ways to, but yeah, it's clinical work. It's not easy. Thank you. Let's move on then. I think, okay, briefly, okay?
Real quick. Just one of the things that I do in my classroom is I just try to normalize their deafness. So like we use the right terminology. You're hard of hearing, I'm hearing, you're deaf, you wear a hearing aid, you wear a cochlear implant. This is spoken English, that is sign language, and just making that a normal conversation for us. I know a lot of the parents will say like, put on your ears. Like those are not your ears, these are ears, that's your hearing aid, that's your cochlear implant, and making some of that terminology just normal for them makes it less taboo. And if we can do that, then maybe that helps them not see it so as something they need to hide or something that can't be talked about.
Thank you. Thank you. And by the way, not to shamelessly try to sell my books, but there's a lot in this book on this subject, on the issue of cochlear implants. There's a chapter here by a psychologist who works in a cochlear implant program with children and families. And she signs fluently, and she's working with lots of kids and families that are promoting cochlear implants. So she goes through the research about what cochlear implants can and can't do, and all the variables that are involved in determining the outcome. It's not just a cochlear implant. There are many other things that determine outcome. And one of her take-home messages is, there's nothing in this book that's anti-cochlear implant. The book is pro-sign language. You know, cochlear implants, good reason to use them a lot of time. I think, I'll admit it, if I had a deaf child, I think I would want the child to have a cochlear implant. And then I'd want them to go to the learning center and learn ASL. And then I would be signing to them. But I would still probably give them the cochlear implant. I think there's pros and cons of each. But the problem is not cochlear implants. The problem is the denial and the rejection of sign language. Let's move on into collaborative problem solving. And again, if you know, I didn't bring the book with me. This book, Treating Explosive Kids, have anyone read this book? If you have kids with behavior problems, there is no better book than this book. I love this book. I'm always returning to it. And I have no affiliation with Ross Green, but he has the best strategy that I know of. And in my book, Staff Training Manual, if you know his book, you'll see all the echoes of it in my book. So I'm drawing on him, and I want to I'm going to let him speak for 5 minutes. And he's going to talk about this issue of the philosophy behind what he calls collaborative problem solving, or CPS. So what he's about to say, you may not immediately get how profound it is. So I want you to listen to him for 5 minutes, and I want to stop, and I want to help you get it. because if you get what he's saying, it's a world-changing, it's paradigm-changing, world-changing insight. It's extremely useful, what he's saying. So let's watch him for 5 minutes, and then we'll talk about it a bit. The issue is, he's trying to address, when you have a student who has a problem, why do they have problems? What's your philosophy? What's wrong? We all think we know, we have a theory, what's wrong. And sometimes we don't state it. He's saying, let's look at what our implicit theories are. What's the problem? Because what we think the problem is points us to what we think the solution is. This is true in education, and it's definitely true in mental health. Oh no, can't access the internet, why not? So, you know what? Probably I'm not signed in. I was signed in before to Wi-Fi, but for some sec.
Yeah, see if you're still signed in on the Wi-Fi.
Can you help me with that? Because I don't want to get this. So let me, what?
You can step off to that side over there and continue, and I'll
Okay.
sit in on your laptop. Yep.
Okay. Because I don't want to lose time struggling with that. I'm going to summarize a little bit about what he's saying. He says, why do children have problems? And particularly he's talking about behavioral problems. He says the general philosophy people have is, why doesn't this child behave? Because they don't want to. They don't want to behave. They're not motivated. If this child would only be more motivated, did you get it? Oh, here it is, right here, right here.
You got it? Oh,
Yeah.
you got it written down.
GJD22.
All right, I'll get it.
They're not motivated. So, and we see this all over in mental health programs. I've worked in so many, the adults, there's a behavioral issue. Why are they hitting? Why are they blowing up? Because, and I get all the time, because they don't get consequences. Because nobody gives them consequences. They don't care enough. They're not motivated to behave. Have you ever heard that? The basic problem is they want attention, or they're not getting consequences, or they don't care, they're not motivated. A lot of us think that when people have, children or adults have behavior problems, it's a deficit in motivation. It's lack of desire to behave appropriately. And he says that model, if you think that the problem with this person is that they lack motivation, then the natural thing you're going to want to do is to improve motivation. And how do you improve motivation? You use a behavior plan, behavior modification. That's where I'll bring in the consequence.
Is this the slide?
That's the slide.
I think if you're working with kids in general, but challenging kids in particular, you need a philosophy. Who is this kid? What's he about? What's he up to? If he's up to anything. Because you see, your philosophy is going to guide your actions, especially when the going gets tough. No philosophy, no guide. The most important theme of collaborative problem solving is this one. Kids do well if they can. Now, nobody ever falls off their chair at the sight of kids do well if they can. It's only an earth-shattering philosophy. If you consider a much more popular alternative philosophy that floats around out there called kids do well if they wanna. No, kids do well if they can, and kids do well if they wanna are two completely different philosophies. And they have completely different ramifications for what you're going to do to or with this kid to make things better. Let's think about kids do well if they wanna for a second. If you've got a kids do well if they wanna mentality and you're working with a kid who's not doing well, then the reason you think he's not doing well by virtue of your philosophy is because he doesn't wanna. I've been thinking about kids do well if they wanna for a long time, and here's the conclusion I've come up with about kids do well if they wanna. It's wrong. Flat out, dead wrong. I ask myself, why would any kid not want to do well? Don't all of us do the best we can in the circumstances we find ourselves in? Well, the kids do well if they want to mentality has those questions covered with concepts like secondary gain, attention seeking, unmotivated, coercive, limit testing. We're going to have those babies put to bed by around 11 a.m. this morning. When you really think about them, they don't make much sense. When you really put them to the test, They don't make a great deal of sense. But let's say they do make sense. Even if kids do well if they wanna is right, and now you know I think it's wrong, it's narrow. Because you see, it greatly narrows the role that you can play in the life of a kid who's not doing well. Because if you think a kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, I can only think of one thing for you to do, only one role for you to play in the life of this kid. Make him wanna. And we have the technology for making kids wanna. How do you make a kid wanna? You reward the behaviors you like and you punish the behaviors you don't. You give him the incentive to do well based on the belief that he didn't have the incentive to do well in the first place, and you are now in the business of making kids wanna. I sure do hope you're right about why he's not doing well, because if you're wrong and you're busy making a kid wanna, and he already does wanna, you run the risk of making things worse, or at the very least, not being as helpful as you might have wanted to be. I'm a kids do well if they can guy. I think if this kid could do well, he would do well. Something must be getting in his way. Your role just changed. Your role just changed. You've just flipped from thinking a kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, and therefore thinking that your role in the life of this kid is to make him wanna, to something a lot harder, and in my experience, a lot more productive. You've just shifted to kids do well if they can, and what's your main role now? Figure out what's getting in his way. Then you can help him. You can't help him if you don't know what's getting in his way. Biggest favor you can do a challenging kid is to finally, at long last, be the person who figures out what's getting in his way. Because you see, if he's still challenging, it's a pretty surefire bet. Nobody's figured it out yet. The key theme of collaborative problem solving, the key philosophy, if you remember nothing else from everything I say, I hope remember that if this kid could do well, he would do well, because kids do well if they can.
Let me say that to you one other way. Why is this person, child or adult, having problems? The model that I bring and that I promote, and I think that the mental health field now puts forward as best practice, as evidence-based practice, we call evidence-based practice, has to do with skills. The assumption all the time is if somebody is lacking, can't succeed at something, they have skill deficits. That model, that paradigm is so useful. No matter, I work now, and again in private practice, very sophisticated people, deaf and hearing. I'm still, when I'm listening to their problems, I'm going, skill deficits. Communication, problem solving, listening, empathy, social skills, assertiveness, problem solving, sometimes very basic problem solving skills. I'm listening for the skill deficits, and that's guiding me in thinking about how do I help them? How do I help them develop the relevant skills that they need, no matter who they are? I don't think they don't want to do better. I don't think, or I try hard not to think, bad person. Or at least I need a whole lot of evidence before I go there. I think skill deficit. Now so if you turn your head around and you're putting on the model, this is one of the things, lessons, this is one of the take-home messages that I hope you'll let sink in, and so I want to dwell on it a bit. Starting with the assumption, this kid in front of me has some skill deficits. I have to engage them and teach them and help them develop skills. Then, okay, starting from that, what do we mean by skill deficits? So I'm going to hear from you. I can lecture to you about them, but what skill deficits do you see in the people that, let's take language aside for a moment. We already talked about language problems. What other kind of skill deficits do you see commonly in children that you're working with? Or for that matter, it can also be parents, adults, people you're working with, or skill deficits in staff. Big issue. This is 12 lessons for staff. It's because staff have all these skill deficits. And they need to learn the same things. Staff also need coping skills and social skills and communication skills and problem-solving skills, especially if they want to teach it to somebody else. So let's just talk, let's brainstorm a bit. What do we mean? Skill deficits, like what are you talking about? When you finish, you can give to...
I was actually just talking about how I help co-facilitate a dialectical behavior therapy group. And one of the biggest...
So let me slow down. Dialectical behavior therapy is one kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's an evidence-based mental health practice, and it has a strong emphasis on skill training.
Mm-hmm. And the 4 components that we teach are emotion regulation, mindfulness, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness.
Just hold on that. Emotional regulation is a fancy way of saying coping skills. So is distress tolerance, a fancy way of saying coping. What do I do when I'm upset? How do I keep in control? So I would say coping, but she uses other words and breaks it down in this other way. Interpersonal effectiveness are social skills. Mm-hmm. Just that she has a tendency to like big words when small words can say the same thing.
With emotion regulation.
With emotion regulation.
What we notice when people start dialectical behavior therapy is that most individuals that we service don't even have the basic feelings vocabulary. They cannot identify outside of angry, happy, sad, and scared what they are feeling. And if you can't label what you are feeling, then how are you going to get to the step of managing those feelings?
Yes. So that is one place where teachers and counselors clearly overlap. People need names for what they are experiencing internally. As feelings, but not just feelings, thoughts and other kinds of physical sensations. The teaching of emotional vocabulary is something that teachers can and should do, and mental health providers need to do. Because you're absolutely right. You're not going to get to what do I deal with anger? How do I deal with anger? It's which way we want to go. When a person doesn't know what anger is or can't recognize what it feels like in themselves. Yes, absolutely. Great. Let me just comment a bit on, this is taking me, because this was relevant to later on, let me just elaborate. So hold on one second. You know this movie, right? Yeah, if you haven't seen Inside Out, put it at the top of your list. Top of your list for teaching about memory, mental functioning, emotional lives. But when we talk about skills, I would divide them broadly into 3 categories. The first is what she refers to, Marshall, in DBT, is self-regulation or distress tolerance, what I call coping skills. I mean, dealing with what's inside. I call it skills for dealing with your inner world, your feelings, your thoughts, your body sensations, recognizing and responding to what's going on internally. Second set are dealing with other people. Social skills, interpersonal effectiveness, okay. Social skills, assertiveness skills, communication skills, conflict resolution skills, goes by different names, but it's all ways of dealing with other people. We need that. Third, thinking skills. And you could put thinking in either one of these 2 categories because everything involves thinking. But problem solving, which collaborative problem solving is emphasizing thinking skills and thinking problem-solving skills. So those 3 sets, they are definitely taught in DBT. In fact, they're taught throughout the cognitive behavioral therapy world. So I don't know if the term cognitive behavioral therapy is new to you, but most evidence-based mental health care, there's research, there's evidence. It's in the field of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. What is cognitive behavioral therapy? It's a lot. But if you're going to condense it down to one thing, I always say it's skills, teaching skills. But it also includes thinking skills. That's a big part, because that's the C part, the cognitive, teaching skills. Yes?
Okay, I'm a teacher of the visually impaired, and a very common skill deficit in my children is self-advocacy. It's often due to, one, lack of confidence. They don't have the confidence to let people, teachers, others know
that they can't see that or whatever. Also, a lot of my students are visually impaired from birth, and they don't know what they don't see. They don't even know what they need to advocate for. Their vision is all they know, or their lack of vision. So, but it's a very common skill deficit that they have. They don't know how to advocate.
And self-advocacy is actually a complex set of skills. I think it's probably a pretty advanced skill. You have to try to make it developmentally fit who they are, but being able to recognize what you feel, ask for what you need, say it in a socially appropriate way, consider how it might be received, because what I want right now is for you to give me a lot of money, or for you to do this, that, or other thing that you have no intention of doing. So I have to consider the other person, which is theory of mind and empathy and perspective taking. It's complex, but yes, it falls in the category of kind of social skills training. You know, speaking up for yourself, assertiveness goes into that category. Assertiveness, the difference between assertive and aggressive is often taught. Yes. Other skill deficits you see commonly. If I asked you, let's go in the direction of thinking skill deficits, problem-solving skill deficits, what do you see? Speaking?
The inability to see the other person's point of view, perspective taken.
Inability to see the other person's point of view. Now, you all know we also call that theory of mind, and it's connected, as I said before, to empathy, and it's developmental, and it's highly dependent on having competent language skills. Are you speaking? You both all speaking? Okay, go ahead. Why don't you pass it back when you're done?
Well, in the realm of problem solving, just identifying what the problem is. Just being able to say, like, a kid can feel that something is wrong and be angry and upset about it, but have difficulty even identifying what is wrong.
So let's think about that. I'm angry because you're trying to get me to do my homework and I want to work on my phone. And this is a problem. What's involved in that? First, I have to be able, it's the ability to step back from the moment. Another way to say that is to become meta, M-E-T-A. Like you step back and, oh, I'm angry. Oh, we're in a conflict. Oh, I want this, but you don't want to give it to me. Oh, that's a conflict. What do we do? Stepping back, looking down at it and going, oh, is this when I'm supposed to share? Is this where I'm supposed to count to 10? Am I supposed to ask you how you feel? You know, that. And again, that ability to step out of the moment and look at it is connected to the ability to think abstractly, not concretely. And that, too, will be dependent on language skills. But absolutely, most of what we want people to do in this is to step back and go, oh, we have a problem. And that's, in fact, one of the steps of collaborative problem solving. Yes?
I'm in the middle school, and once we have identified there's a problem, the next issue that we encounter is, what do I do? But then, is it a big problem or is it a small problem? So then we say, can you handle it, or do you need to go report it to a staff member because it is a big problem? So then identifying, what am I going to do after that, but identifying, can it be something that I'm taking care of, or do I need help?
All right, so now you are in the realm of teaching children how to analyze and to think. Okay, number one, there's a problem. Number two, I have a label for the problem. Now I begin to see big problem, small problem. Then, can I handle this problem? Can I do this myself, or do I need help? If A, this way, if B, this way. If I need help, who can help me? So you're teaching thinking, and I'm presuming that you're using what's called a Socratic process, which means, like Socrates, which means that you guide the student. Okay, now let's think this through. Is this a big problem? What's the problem? Big problem, small problem. Okay, can you solve it yourself? You can. What can you do? Okay, let's evaluate that. And you guide the person, you teach them how to think. That is very much part of collaborative problem solving. It requires your ability to know the components of problem solving, to recognize what a student has and what they lack, and then be able to guide them to the next steps. Sorry. Are you helping me? Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Just if anyone is going to sign, tell me, okay?
I work in the VR world, and this is extremely intriguing to me. One of the things that we see often is our customers are unable to keep their jobs. Keep their employment opportunities. They have the hard skills to do the job, but their soft skills are lacking, and we see obviously we need to look at this model when we're working with them as VR customers, because a lot of this really applies to the soft skills that our individuals need to keep jobs.
So in the VR world, people refer to hard skills and soft skills. Yes, that's another way of saying soft skills, emotional intelligence, or social skills, or self-regulation skills. Lots of words for the same thing. But yes, I think that is absolutely the case. What keeps people from being successful in the job? Not that they can't clean a dish. It's that they can't deal with other people. And the teaching of that becomes the focus. That's where mental health and VR can work together, clearly. Anybody else want to comment on skill deficits that you see? All right, let me run through just quickly. I'm going to read some of these, but I'm going to do this quickly. This is, thank you very much. I appreciate you helping. This is Ross Green talking about skill deficits in the hearing children he's working with. So just quickly, as I go through it, think to yourself, does this apply to deaf kids I'm working with? Language processing. Now he's talking about kids who already have language, they're just not processing it, they're not thinking, but they have language. So they have an advantage over the kids we're working with. Difficulty expressing thoughts, needs, or concerns in words. Check, right? We can check off as we go. Often does not appear to have understood what was said. Yet check. Now, in addition to not hearing what was said, of course. Long delays before responding to questions. This is assuming they've been able to hear or receive the questions. Difficulty knowing or saying how or she feels, right? We were just talking about that. Executive skill, problem solving skills. Difficulty handling transitions. Ever see that? Shifting from one mindset to another or adapting to new circumstances. We are finished with that now. Now we need to go to this. Poor sense of time. Interesting. In hearing kids. Poor sense of time, difficulty doing things in a logical or prescribed order, difficulty staying on topic, difficulty anticipating outcomes. That requires cause and effect thinking, or consequences, considering consequences, possibilities, difficulty considering a range of solutions to a problem, right? Check, 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 right? Cognitive flexibility skills, concrete black and white thinking, insistence on sticking with rules, routine, or the original plan. Inability to depart from the original plan. Does poorly in ambiguous or unpredictable situations. Needs very, very clear situations in order to do well. Difficulty shifting from one idea or solution to another. Difficulty appreciating other people's perspectives. Again, theory of mind. Inflexible, inaccurate interpretations. And then you add language deprivation to all of these things. Right? You can see as we're going through, this is relevant. It's more than relevant. If I read this and I go, wow, you weren't working with deaf kids? You were working with hearing kids and look what you came up with? Emotional regulation, coping skills, difficulty staying calm enough to think rationally, cranky, grouchy, grumpy, irritable, sad, fatigued, tired, low energy, anxious, nervous, worried, fearful. Are these kids going to be referred to mental health? Sure. Are they going to be in your classroom anyway? Sure. Social skills. difficulty attending to or misreading social cues, difficulty starting, entering, maintaining, or ending a conversation, seeks attention of others inappropriately, seems unaware of how behaviors affect others, lacks empathy, poor sense of how one's attitude, behavior comes across to others. How do other people perceive me? Inaccurate self-perception, poor conflict resolution and management skills. I'm assuming everything you're checking, right? This is the domain of skill building, whether you're in teaching or whether you're in mental health. And again, there are lots of ways to do it. Okay, so I talked to you 3 ways I think about it: skills for dealing with your inner world, your outer world, and skills for thinking. Okay, so he has 3 core strategies, and I want to spend some time on each. And so the first take-home message of the day, I hope, is, when I'm confronted with a problem, my go-to model theory is what skill deficits are missing, are there. What skill deficits are there, and then how, and as specifically as possible. And then how do I engage this person in the process of learning skills? Now, the next question is, how do I engage? How do I engage? The single best tool you have for engaging is empathy. Your empathy for them. So that's why there's a chapter in this book about helping staff develop empathy, because in every mental health program I've ever seen, and also in a lot of therapists who you'd think would be better, their empathy skills aren't often great, and sometimes they're quite poor. How do we have to work on developing our capacity for empathy. So that's step 1. So probably the rest of this morning, until we break at 12:15, will be on that. Let's just talk about vocabulary. Again, not sympathy, but empathy. And the way I'm used to signing empathy is heart understand. I've seen other ways. Heart understand. I've seen heart connect to. But is that okay? Heart on. And the difference between empathy and sympathy. So a good way I have to introduce this, and then there's another concept that's often used is validate. And validate is often inappropriately signed as proof, but I don't think it means proof. It really means, I understand. You feel sad. Oh, I understand you feel sad. It's showing that you understand. Not saying I understand, but you explain what you say to the other person. Oh, so you're really angry right now. Is that it? Yeah. Oh, okay, I understand. You're angry because you didn't get your time to do this, and you really wanted more time. And you felt like the teacher was unfair and mean. Oh, I see. I see, which we often gloss that. I see is kind of validation. Okay, I want to show you a wonderful clip that introduces the idea of validation. I noticed that the projector is not quite presenting the colors as sharply as they actually are on the YouTube clip, but that's the way it is. Oh, I wasn't wearing the did I just mess everything up?
Yeah, no, you're fine. Because the mic you have on is the camera.
Can I just leave that on there then?
If you can project your voice. And
All right, if people aren't hearing me, let me know. So let's watch this clip. I've watched that dozens of times, and it always moves me. Let me, just in terms of process, if anybody wants to comment or react, because I know that's very emotional, very heavy, what you saw. Would anyone want to react to that? Hold on. The microphone. Ah.
Employees in the hospital, everyone thinks about that every day in my work, and also when my clients come in. As an employee in a hospital, I think about what they've gone through and the struggles, and I consider this is a nice reminder that we're all human, we all have feelings, and makes you realize that you have to take one step back and think about what it would be like to be in the other person's shoes, and apply that to a parent with a deaf child. Really, the parents, it's the first time they're meeting a deaf child, a deaf person. So of course I have my perspective and thoughts on how to do these things, but take a step back and think about what they know and what they hear and what they've seen. So it's something to think about. Okay, wait a minute. I'd like to respond to that. So things that come up, whatever comes up, my first thought is to look and think, how do you feel? You're feeling all of these different things, sad, hurt, lonely, and realize this. Because all of these things happened, there's a realization to be had. So that's the first step always that leads, always lead with empathy before you do anything. Staff and people in general jump ahead and think of the solution and what to do, and that's not what you should do. Step back to the first step and show empathy on how the person is feeling.
That's the best way.
That's the best way to pull them in and engage someone, be willing, and have them willing to solve the problem. I just wanted to make a comment. I think that we see these things every day because it's human nature to forget. We need to see this every day. That's what you meant. Yes, that's what I meant.
Speaking? Let me just
Yeah.
Hi, watching this video was very emotional because I've experienced some of those things. And it made me kind of think about, as a professional, we have to understand there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. You can feel sorry for what someone may be going through, but if you haven't experienced it, there isn't, to me, a real genuine empathy. I also think that we have to understand as professionals that what may be normal for us could be someone else's tragedy. We may think, oh, that's just typical, you know, that's how it should be. But if the person or the individual or the child hasn't been exposed to it or experienced it, again, it overlaps with the empathy. You don't know what you haven't experienced.
Thank you. While you're talking, I was thinking I recently went through an unpleasant medical procedure. And when I was doctor's about to do it, I remember saying to the doctor, I said, I know you do this every day, and I'm just your morning appointment. But for me, this is the first time, and I'm scared. So please keep that in mind. You know, because yes, we can forget what is really going on for them right now. Thank you. Any other comments? I want to begin to apply this now. And because we're going to have lunch soon, I think I'm going to show you skip ahead to another 2 clips which are funny. And, but relevant. It's from Everyone Loves Raymond, and it's about, did everyone know that show? Everyone Loves Raymond. Their attempts to learn how to lead with empathy with their children. They go to a class to learn parenting skills because, I'll get that in a second. So let's watch this. Hopefully we'll get on without much difficulty. Sorry? Oh, sorry. No. So this doesn't have quality captions. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah. Some of these, you know, YouTube, you can get captions, but sometimes they're you can get captions in YouTube, but sometimes the captions make it worse. So Ray and his wife are attending a class. Actually, this is the next one. So we'll see part 2 in a minute. I love that because that is so representative of what happens when you try to teach people how to do reflective listening. Working with staff, working with parents, working with people. This is hard. This is a skill set. The ability to say, wait a second, oh, you notice he was trying to persuade, he was trying to convince, he threatened, he offered praise, he offered consequences. You know, that's how people think, because they think the problem is that the child doesn't want to behave. But if you lead with the notion, oh, it's a skill deficit, maybe there's some problem-solving skills. Okay, I got that, but how am I going to get you involved? I have to start by empathizing. And something like, so you seem to be really sad because blah, blah. So let's see what happens when they try to do this with their daughter. Okay, so that clip's the best example I know of leading with empathy and the first step of collaborative problem solving. Obviously, easier to say than to do, so we should stop now for lunch. When we come back, we'll process that a little bit and then go on to the next 2 steps. So we're working on collaborative problem solving. Hopefully, we'll get some more into it and hopefully have time to contrast it with some other approaches. First step is leading with empathy. Easy to say, hard to do. The way Ray and Deb were struggling with that was, in my mind, perfect. I wonder if anyone here can give an example of a challenging situation that you might have faced with a student where it might be hard to think about how to lead with empathy. You have one? Wait. I was not doing my job of watching the interpreter. Okay. All right. Here you go.
I have a high school student who's not diagnosed but is a pathological liar. He lies about everything. He tells one teacher he's getting straight A's when I know for a fact he's failing several classes. He tells me he turned in the paper. I contact the teacher. He didn't turn it in. You know, so he's very frustrating right now because it doesn't seem to matter how I approach him, he's still lying about something. And some of it's like inconsequential. It's like it's not important to anybody except for him, but he's still lying about it. So he's a very frustrating individual because I don't know why, and nobody can figure out why or when this lying started because mom says, oh, he's always done it.
So you're talking generally about how he lies. You'd have to apply this to a specific instance. So can you, that's the context.
Mm-hmm.
Give me one instance in which something happened and he said something.
He's doing poorly in English. He's failing his English classes and he plagiarized a test and he flat out lied to me even though I showed him the email from the counselor stating that this is what he did and this is what's going to happen. So he saw the evidence, but he still was lying about it.
How do you think, if you could empathize with him and put yourself in his shoes and see things the way he does, can you guess, conjecture what's going on for him?
I've tried. I guess that's my level of frustration, is just to the level of even seeing this documentation that I know for a fact this is what he did, he still was lying to me. So I tried to empathize. Okay, I understand English is a difficult class for him. And I said that. I said, I understand English is difficult for you. You have resources that you did not utilize in order to write this paper. You chose to plagiarize someone else's paper. Oh, no, I didn't plagiarize. I just changed 4 words. That's not plagiarizing then. So then he started coming up with excuses. And to me, it's something more in-depth than it's difficult.
So let me give you a few thoughts on that. I'm not immediately hearing what I would empathize with. I think if I was getting him at a moment when he's angry or something, I might try to say, of course, looks like you're really angry, it looks like you're really upset, this is bothering you, something like that. I would generally, though, in a situation like that, use a strategy that I call going one down. And there's a chapter in the book, it's the chapter I'm most proud of, on working one down. And this is where I would ask for help and do strategic worrying. Strategic worrying, meaning, let's say his name is Dave. Dave, I need your help. I really need your help. I'm puzzled, I'm worried, I don't know what to do. Do you think you and I, maybe you can help me? Do you have a few minutes, can we talk? And hopefully he would say, all right, what? If he said, no, I don't want to talk to you, then I couldn't go further. But if he said, okay, so here's the situation. I am worried about you. I'm worried about you because you keep getting into trouble. Do you know how you're getting into trouble? Do you know what's happening? And he'd say, no, I'm not doing everything. It's all their fault. I didn't do anything. Okay, so I get it. Do you feel like the teachers are unfair? Do you feel like I'm unfair? Do you feel like you're being criticized all the time? Help me understand how you're feeling. Maybe you feel like school is too hard. Maybe you feel that the teachers are mean. Maybe you feel that I'm mean. Something's going on I don't quite understand because you keep getting into trouble. I keep trying to say, look, this is not good. I'm worried about you. And you get upset with me. How are you feeling, about what's going on? How are you feeling? You got an F here. What do you think? It's not fair, it's not right, teacher's a jerk, it's all no, okay. So you're angry, you're annoyed, you feel it's really unfair. All right, at least did I understand that right? Okay, so here's my worry though. You feel, and then I would go to step 2. I know you feel it's really unfair, but it's happening. It's happening. You got an F here, and you got an F there. You got an F there. Even if it's really unfair, it keeps happening to you. I'm worried about what happens in the future. What happens if you get F and F more and more and more and more? And I feel, I don't want to yell at you. I don't want to scold you. But I don't know how to help you realize that we got a problem. What do you think? I would grope around in that territory. I would try to work, so I call that, strategic worrying. It's a confrontation, but it's from the stance of, I'm worried about you, as opposed to, you're screwing up. And it doesn't mean it's not magic either, but that's the best I got.
Okay. How do you approach the lie?
So, how do I get him to, if I say you're lying, he's going to, I think, okay, let's go back. Is he having a conversation with me? Is he sitting down? Because I don't think I would go towards the lying if we're not having some rapport. So I first have to see if I can get there.
Does he hear the term compulsive liar at school?
The staff is very clear on not saying compulsive lying or pathological lying. Mom and dad are also very clear. They don't really say that.
Okay, hold on. I have neglected my communication management skills. So this gentleman asked, are people using compulsive liar with him? And you were starting to answer that.
When we approach and when we talk to the student specifically, no, it's not mentioned to him that he's a compulsive liar or a pathological liar. But when he is caught in a lie, we do say, we know that you are lying, this is why. So we show that we know that what he's saying is not the truth, but we don't, accuse him of being a pathological liar or a compulsive liar. But we do bring it to his attention, we know that he's lying.
So there's other things I think you can do. So let's say, in this case, certainly I wouldn't say compulsive lying. I wouldn't use language like that. I'm not even sure I would say lying, at least until we have a good rapport. But working with people with any problem, any behavior problem, how am I going to get that on the table? So that's the chapter in here on starting by noting what people do well, starting with strengths. If you can see skills that the person is using, I would look, for instance, for any instance in which he wasn't lying, or any other positive pro-social skills. And I would be going out of my way to saying, in that instance, it looked like you were using being honest skills, or you were using listening skills. I would probably want to spend a fair amount of time affirming him as best I could to get our rapport going, to get him engaged with me, to get him to feel like I'm a person invested in seeing what he does well, before I would go to, but here I'm worried. So I know there would be pressure on me to address it today, but therapeutically I might not be able to. So I might have to push back and say, I'm not going to scold him. The principal can scold him. I'm the counselor. I'm going to try to engage him in a conversation. It's not going to be useful until he's engaged in the conversation. So my focus is, how do I do that? And again, you lead with empathy. And sometimes when you're sitting in therapy, all therapists have this experience. You mentioned dialectical behavior therapy before. There's this word dialectical. It's one of these big words that's hard to sign, hard to explain. But it means you go back and forth between opposing strategies. So the way it's done in DBT is, on the one hand, you've got strategies that are designed to build relationship, which are designed to help people, in essence, not change, feel good who they are, empathy, validation, support, all the things we do to engage a person and help them feel good about themselves. That's one set of skills. Then there's an opposite set of skills, which are change skills. How do we get people to behave differently? And the dialectic, that means you go back and forth. Sometimes you're not working on change at all. You're working on rapport and relationship. But when you have the rapport and relationship and it's there, you shift into the change strategies. Most of the change strategies are skill building strategies. So the art of therapy in this model is knowing how to move in the dialectic between acceptance and change. And if this is an angry, defensive, hostile, conduct disordered young man, and I'm starting out with him, we're not going to be working on change. We're going to be working on acceptance, rapport, validation, support as much as I can. I want to go there, but not until he's with me. So that would be the therapeutic challenge. So I would empathize as best I could, and I can tell you, I know just how hard it is from lots of experience. I also, because everybody else is freaking out about the lying, but I've had people doing this situation where people were doing, sexual offending, crimes, very serious crimes, and people are going, oh my God, you got to do something. And the police don't want anything to do with it because he's deaf, I can't do this, he's deaf, so they back off. So therapists, fix it. And all the pressure on us is to be one up, fix it, tell them to do something. But the therapeutic strategy is all about being one down, engaging, trying to get them to think, wonder, be curious about, worry, engaging them in problem solving, and pushing away all the people who want me to be police. Because I'm not the police, I'm the therapist. All right, that's the best I can do. Right, I hope that. Other examples, but a great example. Especially, can you give me an example of a specific instance where a child was very upset about something? Yes.
I have a student who recently got into a small argument with another student right before they were supposed to go on a field trip. And my student, who has difficulty managing his emotions, pushed the other student to the floor and then was not allowed to go on the field trip anymore. And then became even more upset and completely shut down, and he's got clenched fists and a puffed out chest, and he won't talk at all. Won't answer any question, not yes or no.
Great example. That's a perfect example. Okay, let's start with our assessment. Skill deficits. Anybody? What do you think the skill deficits? There are many. Anyone? Can you name them? Name some skill deficits. Sorry, remember our communication skills. So raise your hand and I'll bring this to you, unless you're signing.
Coping with his emotions.
Okay, and let's try to be even more narrow, even more specific. That's the general category, coping with emotions. Can we break it down more?
Not getting physical with other people.
When he feels angry,
Yes.
his skills for getting angry is to hit or push or something. He lacks any kind of skills for noticing, maybe naming what he's feeling, and then stepping back from it, going, oh, I'm angry, what do I do? Even something like counting to 10 or going for timeout, all things we usually say. He doesn't have that in his skill repertoire. I'm presuming. What else? That would be a big one, but there's a lot of. The other student wanted something from him, and they got into a conflict with each other.
I have two. I'm going to say his communication skills, especially in the heat of a moment, and also his resources. He didn't know to turn around and go tattle or something instead of pushing.
His communication skills, conflict, we call conflict resolution, probably basic communication. I want this, you want this. We have what are we going to do? What problem solving like that. Then when he's upset, he went to violence. He didn't even ask for help skills. Maybe he didn't have them. Ask for help in the moment. I'm stuck, I'm angry, I don't want to blow up. Self-talk skills, like, oh, I'm really angry. If I punch this person right now, I'm going to get in trouble. Then I won't be able to go on the trip, which is also thinking of consequences skills. Not there. Better watch out, cool down. Probably that isn't going on at all. He probably is talking to himself along the lines of, that's I don't know his language, but bad kid picking on me, I'm going to hit him. Something like that is going on in his brain. He's not aware of how he's talking to himself. He's not aware of how his thoughts are feeding his emotions and his behavior. He doesn't know how to stop any of that from going on. We have a big challenge of getting all this on the table, especially if his language skills are poor. Anybody else?
I can understand why he would be really upset, especially if the other child got to go on the field trip. Yeah, so there's the whole that's not fair to me thing going on, which could definitely make anyone feel upset.
Yeah. If he has the concept, he's probably thinking, this isn't fair, they're picking on me, he got what he wants, and I would guess also that this is probably a kid who has a lot of failure in life, not a lot of success, a lot of times where he's getting consequences, getting punishments. I don't know how much positive support he gets, so he's probably feeling a lot of deep embarrassment and shame, and talking about it is for him probably just acknowledging or being present with something like shame. Shame is a really, really hard emotion for everyone. When people shut down or they go to anger or rage when they feel shame, he probably can't articulate it, but I'm guessing he's at least embarrassed, he's probably ashamed, he doesn't have words for it, he doesn't have any, and so talking about it is just very, very threatening. I'm guessing, something like that. So now you're the counselor?
I'm the teacher.
You're the teacher. So this may or may not be your role because this may take some time. But he's there and he's not engaging, and maybe he's sent to the counselor's office. I mean, I don't know how to do this while you're teaching a class, because he needs some individual attention. So maybe he has to go to see a counselor who will do the same behavior with. But if you're the counselor, so I'm thinking, I'm the counselor, I don't know if I'm going to get through to him. I don't know if I'm going to get him to talk. But I know what the best strategy is. I know what the best ways to engage him. It's going to be, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to myself. My self-talk is empathy, empathy. Do what you can to empathize. Maybe you won't get him today, but maybe he'll talk tomorrow. Second thing, I'm thinking to myself, look for anything that I can affirm. Any example of a tiny skill, or I can say, that was a little bit of something. Look for something to affirm. The problem, I'm guessing we're not going to get to it. We're not going to get to it until he's more engaged. So sometimes not much verbal. I'm going to do empathic attunement non-verbally, right? You know how to do that. You mirror somebody. Maybe, counselors learn this. I don't know how much teachers do. But, you use your empathic listening posture. You lean forward. You nod your head. You try to show emotion on your face. You try to be present. You try to give words to it. And that may be all you can do right now. But let's say that happened. There are lots of stories like this in both of these books, because I've been through this. This my whole career, I feel, is this situation. Different variations of it. Well, maybe it may not happen today. Maybe what I'm doing today is planting seeds. I want you, client, student, to see me as on your side. I want you to see me as an ally. I want you to see that I care. I want you to feel that I empathize, even though that we don't have word for it. And I'm going to try to go at your pace as best I can, so that eventually, I hope you will be able to talk. But I know we're not going to fix it today, and everyone who's telling me to fix it, I'm going to tell to go away, because it's not possible yet. We're on this side of the dialectic. We're on acceptance and affirmation. We're not going to get to change today. Back off. Let me do my job. Okay, so I mentioned another thing. There's a part of this presentation which has to do with how do we build empathic listening skills in our students. That's not part of collaborative problem solving per se. Collaborative problem solving is you show empathy. You use reflections. A big part of my training is how do you get staff to do it. And the emphasis in my approach is if you have a vocabulary for skills, you know the names of lots of skills, you are constantly looking for skills and ways to say to somebody, that, my goodness, do you know what skill you just used? That was listening. That was taking turns. That was showing caring about another person. That was helping another person. So let me show you a great, another clip. This is from Sesame Street. I love Sesame Street. And this is a clip about empathy, teaching the concept of empathy. But the really interesting thing about this clip is not that. What I want you to do is, as you watch this clip, I want you to be meta to it. Step back and ask yourself, what is the teaching method? What is the teaching method that is being illustrated? It is a brilliant teaching method. It's not random what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing and how they're teaching the concept of empathy. Look at the method. It's very applicable. It's very deaf-friendly. It's human-friendly. And there's a lot to learn from this in terms of how you work with people that are troubled. This should be captioned well. By the way, that is also a great staff training clip. So what was the pedagogical teaching method that Sesame Street used to teach the concept of empathy? Anybody?
Show, not tell.
Show, not tell. Is this on? Can you elaborate? I know your voice is not easy for you to say.
That they made up, he kind of discovered it himself. You kind of showed him, you brought him in to be a part of the lesson, and it was more internalized, better than just tell him what empathy is or this.
Right.
Yeah.
So you all see, I assume, he started out by saying, let me explain it to you, and he gave the definition. And of course, that failed miserably. So then he went to examples. And he tried to, and we do that, right? We teach with examples. We teach general, because children generally are concrete thinkers, and anyone with language deprivation, you have no alternative but to give examples. But it wasn't just that. They went beyond that. What else did they do beyond thinking with examples? Thinking beyond giving examples. Sorry, we got her. Okay.
He chose an example that the red guy could relate to.
Well, okay, it was a developmentally appropriate example. Anything else? It just happened. It was the puppet, Murray, showed empathy. It just occurred, but he didn't know he showed empathy. He doesn't have a name for it. So the Mark is giving an example, but he's pulling for, eliciting empathy from the puppet. And then when the Murray shows empathy, he goes, that is empathy. And he gives it a name. And he had to do it twice. The strategy is, this is a standard behavior modification strategy. You look for when the positive behavior is there. You look for when the behavior you want is there, and you reinforce it. But here, not just reinforce it, he says, that what you just did. And then he gives it a name. That was empathy. So for instance, with regard to the person who lies, you would be looking for examples of when the problem behavior is not present. So when does he either tell the truth, or I might even go lie less, or lie and then tell the truth after. So maybe he's lying and lying and lying, and then he admits it sometime. So if I'm looking for the skill, I would say, wow, I noticed you use a skill. Because before, the skill was, do you know what the skill was? Admit, lie, tell truth. Very nice. When you admit, lie, tell truth, I feel happy, and I want to talk to you more. Look for examples of when the skill that you want to see is there. Now in the case of, and give it a name and cite it, it means for staff, I don't know if I need to hold that. It means for staff, we're all oriented to seeing problems. If somebody blows up and throws a chair, you will see it, right? You will see it. When they don't throw a chair, do you see that? When this young man doesn't lie, or lies and then admits, when there's a change, when there's something positive, does anybody see it and catch that moment? Because if you want to get him into a discussion about lying, he's got to feel that you're empathic and attuned to him, and he's got to also see that you see what he does well. So as a teacher, I would be looking like an eagle for examples of positive social skills or coping skills, and that I'd want to take them aside when I could, if whatever's permitted, however I can, and say, you sat in your chair for a full hour, and I saw you were listening, and you helped your neighbor in a really nice way. You were using helping skills, you were listening skills, you were using paying attention to skills. Really nice job. But naming, not just nice job, naming the skills to try to bring him in. I recognize as a teacher, there is a difference. You're not in a counselor role. So it's harder. You don't have a lot of time, and you have whole classroom, but can you do a little of it around the edges? So any other examples? A problem behavior, or a child that's upset about something, and you're the counselor or the teacher, and you're called in to fix it, but actually the first thing you got to do is try to do the active listening. Can you think of some other example?
I wanted to talk somewhat about how we use a program called Kids at Hope. I don't know if you're familiar with it or if you've even heard of
Kids
it.
at?
Kids at Hope.
No, I don't know.
And I've worked for a residential summer camp since I was 16 as a camp counselor. The program that we use is focused on youth that are identified as at risk. I would say a bulk majority of the youth that I serve in my therapy position are considered at-risk, low socioeconomic status youth. And the term at-risk could be applied to quite a few different youth, regardless of their circumstances. But the whole concept and the whole construct of Kids at Hope is very much similar to that catch them being good mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about fostering hope. So the kids are not at risk in our eyes. They're considered at hope.
Okay.
And the staff that work with them are considered treasure hunters.
Good.
So it is our job as treasure hunters to seek out the talents, skills, and intelligence that each youth possesses.
Awesome.
And
the problem then being?
Well, you'll see all kinds of problematic behavior. And a youth that would normally typically be described as argumentative or bossy. Instead, I would use a positive reframe. And so I would say that that child is passionate about what they believe in. And they're going to make an excellent lawyer one day because they have fantastic negotiation skills. So picking out and highlighting those things and helping them use those strengths that they have for more appropriate uses and eliciting that response from them while simultaneously developing that rapport.
Okay. So you're offering that as an example of an approach using this. Okay, great. So let me just say, I really like that, and it has obvious dangers. The dangers are, the strengths of it that I'd see is that it's affirming and engaging. It should bring the student into the therapeutic conversation. However, I don't want to call black white. You know, an extreme example, if somebody just stabbed you, you don't want to say, great stabbing skills, or something like that. I mean, you know, so I would want to say, I would want to give feedback that wasn't just a positive frame, but it was really true. So I might scale it back a little. I might say, I wouldn't say, oh, you're going to be a great lawyer someday, or you know, great advocacy, if it really wasn't great advocacy. I might say, you spoke up for yourself. You said how you felt. You said how you felt, and you didn't insult anyone or hit anyone. It was really clear communication. I might say that, but I don't think I'd want to step beyond what I really feel I could defend as true. Because I don't want to tell a kid who's really behaving badly that he's behaving well. So the trick for me is, if I know the micro skills, the tiny, tiny developmental skills, it might just be sitting in a chair, listening, taking turns, eye contact. I'm going to say that. I don't want to say, you're acting great lawyering skills or something, because it's not honest. And it can lead this kid to believe that he's doing much better than he is. So to me, it's all about engagement, using that to engage. But I have every intention of getting to the problems when he's ready. And I'm probably going to get, if I got enough examples of good behaviors, good skills, at a certain point I'm going to go, remember you did this, how awesome that was? And what did you do here? Wasn't that awesome? And you did this and did this. Wow. Now, I want to ask you about some other things. Okay? You ready for this? Yesterday, when this happened, and you punched Jose in the face, were you using these skills? What do you think? What happened? Because before you did and yesterday, so tell me the story and try to get it. But I want to get there, because counseling shouldn't be lying. It's engaging, but we do confront. We just have to get the person ready to hear the confrontation. It's a preparation for the tough work. The pre-therapy work, in my words, is to get the person in the conversation and to get us talking about skills. So we have the conversational framework, skills, we have the rapport, we've got some trust, and then we're going to get there. You know, I'm moving there, but you got to come with me. One more comment, and then we'll move on. Sorry, I think you're over here.
One problem that we see, especially those of us who work with the kids that are in the mainstream, is that they start to reject using the FM system and even their hearing aids at a certain stage. And it's kind of hard, like, how do you approach that with empathy? Do you let them just,
What do you do when they're not using their hearing aids or the FM system?
Yeah, other than saying you have to.
Well, you know, that's a problem, because lots of deaf people don't want to use the FM system or the hearing aids. And is it my job to enforce that? Maybe it is, but then do I want that job? You know, I think that has to be discussed on a number of levels, because maybe there are good reasons not to use the FM system. Maybe there are good reasons not to use. We hearing people, we think the hearing aids are helping. Are they? Is the FM system helping, or is it just creating more frustration? Is what this kid really needs to sign? If I go there, am I becoming part of the oppressive establishment? You know, punishing them because they're not doing what we hearing people think they should be doing. I think that I'd have to unpack that a lot to decide, because I don't want to be an agent of oppression. I do want to keep my job. So it's tricky. Other than that, I would use the same strategies of looking for empathize. How do you feel? They don't want to use the FM system. Why? When you use the system, what do they say? I can't understand. It hurts my ears. It's frustrating to me. It bothers me. It's not comfortable. What's their reason? And then I might say, oh, so it hurts your ears. You feel uncomfortable. It bothers you. It's not helping you. It just feels it's not working for you. I have to start with empathy and trying to understand. And if they're saying to you, this really doesn't work for me, maybe I need to listen to them.
You let it go just because they
embarrassing? What's that?
The reason is it's embarrassing. You just like, okay, you don't have to learn how to deal with it being, there's nothing to be.
Oh, sorry. We have to remember this. Go ahead. You were saying maybe the reason is because they're embarrassed. Because they're the only kid in the classroom with the FM system, and it's stigmatizing to them. So maybe we should be teaching them to cope with embarrassment. All right, that's a value. Maybe we should, but maybe he needs a school setting where he's not embarrassed. You know, so I don't know. Again, this is one deaf child, if it's the case, in a hearing classroom with a stigmatizing thing like an FM system. Used to be the hearing aids. That's why my hand is here. The old hearing aids, you know, that marked you as a deaf person. And who knows what else this kid is going through in terms of bullying and anything else that he's getting in the classroom. He doesn't want to wear it because it embarrasses him and he's being picked on. And maybe that's the issue. And if I just attend to the fact that he's not using good coping skills, I don't know that I'm serving this kid. Maybe what I need to do is advocate for this kid to be in a different situation. Or maybe I need to teach the class to be more accepting of difference, or be more empathic with each other. But why is it just this kid's problem and not the system that's not doing well by this kid? So I guess I just want to, it has to be unpacked in a lot of ways, I think. So let's go on to step 2 because of time. So you empathize, first step. Another, just on that, place I use this, I worked in, as you know, in a hospital, psychiatric hospital, for 17 years. We had very, very severe behavior problems. we would have what we called green alert. Green alert. So they would say, green alert. That means every guy in the hospital, and some women too, come running down to the unit. What are they going to do? They're all going to gang up on the person and restrain them. And we did that for years. And it was one of the ways in which we were not a good program. Now, we got better. We learned that's one of the reasons I developed this. We learned other alternatives. But I came after a while to realize that when I was going down to any kind of problem situation, I'm walking into a situation, somebody's throwing a chair or something else. My self-talk, my skill, my self-talk is empathy. Empathy. I'm going in there and, if I can, I'm thinking, can I get this person to have a conversation with me? Maybe I can't. If he throws the chair, we're probably over the line. But I'm going to try. Look, I'd like to really hear what's going on. Can you tell me what's going on? I promise I will listen as best I can. Can you promise not to hit me? And if you can put down the chair and not hit me, maybe we can sit and talk, and I will try to understand. And that would be how I begin. And I try to begin like that all the time. And I try to teach the staff to begin like that all the time. And that was one of the ways, actually, we got our restraint numbers way down, by leading with empathy. Whatever is going on, 95% of the time. Now, if they got a gun, that's not your empathy moment. Although it might be. If you got to get the person to put down the gun, maybe the only way is going to be to empathize, to at least get them to calm down. But that's how we begin. And usually that's not what's done. Usually what's done is limit setting. You do that, consequence. You're out of here. Some kind of punishment. Okay, so we got empathy. Second step is this step of becoming meta, M-E-T-A, to the problem. What's the problem? Can we get the person to see there's an issue, there's a problem? Can we see it? Oh, you're angry. Oh, we have a conflict. Oh, something else is going on. Getting people to step back and look at it. So, again, Sesame Street gives us a great example of how to do this. So again, watch this clip and ask again, what's the teaching method? How is the concept of, in this case, conflict being taught? What's the teaching method? Hint, it's the same method. And it's done just as well. And I think the captions here are good too. By the way, there's another clip here. If you start looking for Sesame Street, this one is about teaching the concept of resist. And it's the same idea. Cookie Monster has to resist a cookie. And of course, Ian McKellen in this case starts out by giving him a definition of resist, which doesn't work at all. And then he offers an example of some very abstract something resist jewelry. If you wanted to buy some jewelry and you didn't have enough money, you'd have to resist it. And Cookie Monster says, I'm not really a jewelry guy. That doesn't really work for me. So then he thinks, oh, cookie. And he brings out the cookie, and the Cookie Monster wants to get at the cookie, and then he can't. He goes, well, what's that? Well, that's, what's the word? What's the word? Resist, right there. Using the example of what's pertinent. Resisting the cookie in that moment. So the method you saw in the conflict. How is the concept of conflict being taught?
So they indirectly use a non-example of the sharing that's not conflict. And then so when they get to the conflict, they can contrast that.
It was interesting because he was trying to elicit a conflict. But it didn't work because they weren't having a conflict. So they were using sharing skills, which is wonderful. He pointed out you're using sharing skills, and that's great, but that wasn't a conflict. Then they got into a conflict. And then he goes, wait, this is a conflict. And that's the teaching moment, right? That's the moment of becoming meta. Oh, we're having a conflict Now, this is what conflict is. Oh, it's stepping back and saying, okay, so you want this, but you can't have it. You both want this, you can't both have it. I want you to do something, you don't want to do it. You're upset because of something your mother said, or something else. You're feeling sad. You're in conflict with your mother. Giving it a name. In collaborative problem solving, it's the identification of the problem. But I think in the world of working with deaf children, deaf adults, it's even more important to name things. So, we have the define the problem or just name it. What's going on now? Step back. Oh, this right now is going on. So let's talk examples about this. Can you give me some? A situation where there was a conflict, there was a problem, and the child does not realize, is not able to step back and say, oh, this is a problem. How would you help make that that moment of self-awareness happen? Remember, you lead with empathy, then you try to get the problem defined.
So in our program right now, we have 2 preschool classrooms, and our SLO, our student learning objective this year as a team, is to get the kids to be able to start answering the question, what is the problem? So yesterday I was starting a group, and this kid was jumping up and down trying to get a ball chair down from the counter, and he just kept jumping up and hitting it, and he would turn around and look at me, and he would go, Miss Deegan. And I'm like, what? He's like, he's just batting at the ball, and I'm sitting there going, I'm waiting for him to say, it's too high, or help me get it down, but I had to pull it out of him, so I just sat there and went, oh my goodness, it looks like you have a problem. What is the problem? And he kept going, the ball, and he kept jumping and jumping and jumping. But I was like, well, okay, we're not there yet. Hun, the problem is the ball is too high. You have a problem. The ball is too high. Can you say that? And he repeated, the ball is too high. And then he said, I can't reach it. I need help. So we got there. But we're repeating that all day long to 3-year-olds. What is the problem? What is the problem? What is the problem? Well, you look mad. You look like you're having a problem. We do a lot of labeling and taking the minute for the kid to calm down about not being able to reach the ball and just kind of asking the question.
Is perfect. Awesome. Exactly what this model would have you to do. I would let you know in my work with adults, we were doing exactly that. With adults who can't articulate, I want to get the ball and I can't reach it.
Yeah, it's the same across all the grades. We're really
But
focusing
you're
on it with
starting
the little guys.
young, which is when you should. So that is a superb example of identify the problem, give them the words. Now, building on that, you want to be able to note times when there's progress and label the progress. So let's assume tomorrow the child says, ball, and says a little bit more, ball, help me. Then, you're getting a little bit more. What would you do? Wait.
I would repeat.
Did I give you back that? Oh, you still have it.
I would probably repeat the prompt. You have a problem. What is the problem?
Yeah.
The problem is.
Yeah.
And then he can say ball.
So you keep working at it. Now let's suppose
keep relabeling.
You keep working with Liam. Let's suppose one day he does it all. He gets something and he articulates it. I got the ball out and I did it myself. Then what would you do?
Say great job, you had a problem. Your problem was the ball was too high, but you solved the problem. You got help or whatever. You had a problem, but you did it. Or thank you for telling me what the problem was, if he's coming to communicate.
So my work here is done. That was
maybe for
awesome.
that one child.
With that one child. But that's the idea. That's collaborative problem solving. Also notice that you are using Socratic teaching. You're giving him as much information as he needs, and you're pulling him along. What do you have to do? And then this, then this, then this. You give him a little bit. You spoon feed him. You pull him into the process through your own prompts and your own questions.
And he's a student who can where luckily we can cope, he's patient enough where he can cope with that pulling. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of kids who can't cope with that pulling. So
Yeah.
I would want to be able to do that, follow that model with all of my kids, but I have several kids who would sooner just throw the whatever at my face, and then we'll just have to do it again tomorrow. But that like pulling out process is really hard.
Any idea what you would do with a student who's not able to articulate any, and they just throw the ball at you?
Then I have to go back even further, and like Kelly was saying earlier, with just labeling, just giving them language, you look like you're angry.
It seems like empathy. You're not at problem solving with this kid. You're not at identifying with the problem. Kid is not developmentally ready for that. You're doing empathy. Seems like you were really, really angry. And it seems like and then you threw the ball because you were angry at me. Ooh, that hurt. I didn't like it. But I understand you were very angry. You're giving them language and you're empathizing. And maybe that's all you can do right now. Of course, you could apply consequences. You could punish the kid. You could put him in the corner or something like that. That's not collaborative problem solving. It's not teaching skills. Somebody else? Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to add also, if we noticed in the Sesame Street clips,
Yep.
that after they taught, they modeled, they prompt, there was also a reinforcement of celebrating that they achieved the goal.
Yeah.
And that's a reward. So that's something that like ISRC focuses on. We want to teach the behavior, teach what you want them to do, model how it looks, and we prompt them when we want them to do it, and then praise and reward them when they accomplish it, because a kid will do more positives when they see that you're celebrating what they did.
And absolutely. So basic principle always is to notice and reward successes. But so sometimes the way I talk about this is different kinds of interventions that have different levels of skill. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of an intervention with a child who, let's say, used cooperation skill. And I'd like you to grade my intervention as an A, B, C, D, E, or F. Okay? So I'm going to give you 4 examples. So can I use you? Would you mind role-playing from back there with me? I'll do all the talking. What is your name, please?
I'm an actress, I love it.
Oh, good. What is your name? Lisa. Lisa. Okay, so Lisa, let's just imagine that you just used a great example of sharing skill with, you shared a flower with your friends. And I'm the teacher. Okay, so I'm going to give you the intervention. First intervention is, since there was no fuss, it all went well, I just went on with the lesson. And actually didn't comment, didn't notice. So give me a grade and write down the grade. Okay, now I'm going to do it again. You can sit, Lisa, thanks. Second grade is, I saw the sharing, and I'd say, Lisa, great job, great job. Well, give me a grade for that. A, B, C, D, E, F. All right, now we're going to do it again. Lisa, I just saw you and Joe, and it looked like you were sharing the flower. You were using sharing skills that we talked about yesterday. Awesome. Awesome use of sharing skills. Makes me really happy to see that. Yay. Okay, give me a grade on that. But there's one more. Lisa, I just saw something incredible happen. You just used an amazing skill. Did you notice? What did you do? You shared. You used your sharing skill. Lisa, how'd you do it? How'd you do it?
I just gave it to her because she's my friend.
You gave it to her. She's your friend. And how did she feel? Happy. She felt happy. And how did you feel? Happy. Happy dance. Happy dance. And I feel happy too. Awesome sharing skills. And helping your friend feel happy skills. So give me a grade on that. Okay, first one. Not noticing. What's the grade? F, D, mean, it wasn't bad, it just wasn't good, right? I mean, I didn't punish them, but it was a lost opportunity, right? I didn't notice the positive thing happening. Second one was, great job. C, why C? Yeah, but why just a C? It's not specific. So we do this all the time. Great job, but we don't say what's a great job. So the next time I got specific. Lisa, great sharing skills. Great job. What grade would you give that? B. It was an A until you saw it. Right. That's what, because everybody gets this. Everybody gets this. It was because they think that the top is when you're specific. No. It's not an A unless they tell you. There's a core lesson in counseling. And I think about this with everyone I'm working with. Whenever I get into my pontificating mode and I'm trying to tell someone what to do, I'm maxing out at B as a counselor. I'm not doing A work unless I'm getting them to tell me. How do I get them to tell me? By asking good questions. Socratic questioning. Asking questions is top-level counseling or teaching. Socrates is famous for this method. It's his method that's used in law schools. You teach by asking good questions. You teach people to think by modeling and asking good questions. That's the champ teaching. You tell me, if I can get you to tell me what skill it was, then I can go home and say I did A+ today. But as long as I'm telling you, I'm maxing out at B. Does that make sense? So the one down work, you know, one up is always when I'm telling you, and I'm telling you what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And some of that is fine. But it really, really top teaching is one down. We're saying, so then what happened? And then you did what? And then that other person did what? And then how did they feel? And then how did you feel? And what was the name for that skill again? And how exactly did you do that? I love asking how did you do that, which I know is an impossibly abstract question. But I ask it anyway because I want them to go, what's he talking about? How did he do that? How? I don't know. Well, I guess I just listened, or I used my skill or something. I want them to ponder it. In my experience, having done this in many, many settings, with many clients and staff, initially they don't know what you're talking about, and they get frustrated. But eventually they get with the program. If you stay with it, and you model it over and over again, they eventually learn what you're looking for. And what I'm looking for you to tell me is what skill you used. And eventually, because you want to succeed, and you know that's what I want from you, you'll start giving me skill language back. And once you're giving me skill language back, we are now in the world of problem solving. We are now in the world of conflict resolution. Now you can come to therapy. Now I have something to offer. Because you get that we're working on solving a problem. And it involves you talking and me talking and listening and us thinking together and trying to figure something out. Then I have something to offer as a therapist. Until that point, I'm just trying to pull you in. The pre-therapy. Thank you. Great example. So the third part is, again, we're developing. You know that you are developing the child's ability to self-observe, or be meta, self-observed skills. Oh, I feel angry. Oh, I feel sad. Oh, we're having a conflict. That's a really important set of skills for you to develop. If this child has impaired language, they probably have impaired theory of mind. They probably have impaired empathy. They probably have impaired abstract reasoning skills. They probably can't do this. Your job is to help them do it. But it's, it's hard work. But we have this method, and we have other methods. Okay. So some of the things, just to show you quickly, this is from the inpatient unit. Another thing you do in, of course, deaf-friendly work is you develop pictures for everything. So we have pictures, and we would create skill cards. And we have hundreds of these things. And we'd use a card like this. This is a situation card. It has a conflict. So in a group, if I were doing a group, I would say I have all these cards, and they have different conflicts. This might be one. Here's another. What TV show are we going to watch? This comes up all the time in group homes. This came up in the hospital all the time because one was neat, one was dirty, one messy. They understand this. Somebody cut in line. These are all great teaching scenarios. So I have a bunch of cards, and I want to teach problem solving in these social situations. But if I start saying to them, I want to teach problem solving in social situations, nobody will listen. So instead I'd say, pick a card. Pick a card. That's the start of the group. That's the whole introduction. Pick a card. In 30 years of doing this work, not once did anyone refuse to pick a card. They always pick a card because it's a game. And if you can make anything into a game, people naturally, it's another engagement method. You do it in a game. So they pick this card. And then we say, okay, let's role play it. Another thing we do, of course, we role play. In deaf mental health, it's been my observation that hearing, not in hearing mental health, some counselors use role play, most don't. I use role play with everyone all the time. I use role play with people with doctoral degrees. It's in my blood. Because of working with deaf people, I don't know how to do this work without role playing. I find that if you're comfortable with it, people will do it. But so we get up. This would be a group. Have them line up. Somebody cuts, right? We're right there. Everything's right there, live right now. What's the problem? What's the conflict? Name the conflict. Okay, how are you feeling? How are each of you feeling? What can we do? And then you're one down. You're not saying, you need to go in line first. You need to wait your turn. That's one up. It's telling them what to do. It's not helpful. Well, maybe a little bit, but it's not more than a B. They can tell you. I'll give you an example of this from, I remember in the group home. Staff, these again, adults, deaf adults. Staff, deaf man, driving clients to the store. What are they fighting about? Who's going to sit in the front seat? These are adults. Who's going to sit in the front seat? The staff person goes, look, you can't fight. You go in the front seat now, and you go on the way home. And then they did that, and they went to the store back and forth. What do you think of that intervention? What grade would you give it? Did I take back the microphone? Oh, sorry. Oh, you've got it. Thank you. Give that a grade. Raise your hand, please. Who says A? Any votes for A? B? C? C, I got a C over there. A few C's. D? E? You get E's anywhere? F? What's the limitation of that intervention? You got the conflict solved, but did they teach skills? No, there's no skill building. There's only obedience training. That's not hard to turn into a skill building situation using this basic method. How would you take this up and resist if you teach the staff? Don't tell them who sits in the front seat and who sits in the back. This is not rocket science. They can figure this out. You help them figure it out. How would you do it? Yes, I think microphone. Sherry.
Have them identify the options. Start with
Even
identifying the options.
before there, have they identified the problem?
Oh, identify the problem first.
Even before there, where's the empathy?
And start with empathy.
Yeah, start
Let's
with
work
empathy.
backwards. What have we been talking about all day?
Yes.
Step 1, 2, 3.
So you could say, you want to add to it? Go ahead.
I can tell you both like me so much. You both want to sit in the front seat. I understand the problem. Or I understand how you're feeling.
Okay, now, how do you make it their problem?
What are you going to do?
So I would even take that a step further. I'd say, you both want to sit in the front seat. Is it me? Do you like me that much? You both want to sit in the front seat? I'd like to sit with both of you. But we've got a problem. Now I'm going to play dumb, which is another version of one down. We've got a problem. Only one of you can fit. Another problem is if you fight, do you think I want to drive you to the store? If you fight, am I going to be willing to drive you to the store? Are we going to get to the store if you're fighting? No, we're not. So I need a plan. But gee, I don't know what to do. What should we do? Is it possible that they could come up with taking turns on their own? I mean, again, usually yes. I'm banking on it, that they've got this somewhere in their brain, taking turns. And then when they do that, and they come up with the plan, I'll go now, he'll go later. Then I do what? This is my teaching moment. What do? Label it. That. Awesome. You guys just use awesome skills. Now tell me the name of the skill that you just used. Now I'm doing this with adults. You may think this is patronizing and insulting to them. I assure you it wasn't. It was at their developmental level. They did not feel I was talking down to them. If they did, then I would be behaving inappropriately. It wouldn't be, but it's fitting these people. And then they said taking turn skills, because they learned that I talk that way and I want that language from them. And then they say taking turns, respecting each other, something like that. And then I go, awesome. And then I would use an I statement. Now I feel happy and I feel safe driving you to the store. And then we do a fist bump or something like that. That's collaborative problem solving and teaching. But beyond that, teaching the names for the skills. Now, in order to do this, the tricky thing is you have to have a very strong vocabulary for skills. And I'm watching time, so I'm going to jump ahead because I want to make sure you're exposed to some other methods. Because that's collaborative problem solving in a nutshell. It's an approach where you lead with empathy, you identify the problem, and then you invite. What can we do about it? I need your help. Let's figure it out. And then you use Socratic teaching to guide them through the process of making a decision. Now, one of the parts I would add to that is when it's done, you label the skills. He doesn't emphasize that. But I feel, coming from the deafness world, that the names, providing names for things is very important. Perhaps more so than it is with hearing children. Naming. And then naming the skill and then celebrating it. Now, okay. So I'm going to skip ahead here. I just want to show you some other approaches. Maybe there's, in the world of education and in the world of mental health, there are lots of skill training approaches. Maybe you've seen some of them. Some people have referenced some. One is Boys Town. Has anyone seen the Boys Town program? So that you can look them up online. There's the link, or just go Boys Town. The thing about the Boys Town model, it's worth getting a hold of some of the books because they name so many skills. And they have an organized curriculum for skill training. Now, collaborative problem solving, first of all, is primarily about thinking skills. Boys Town is much more general, many kinds of skills, coping skills, social skills, and there's a formal training program. So in collaborative problem solving, you're not doing formal skill training according to a curriculum. But in a lot of approaches, there actually are curriculi for teaching these skills. I think I read these books because it improves my vocabulary for skills. I think the task for staff is to have a very large vocabulary for skills so you can go, that was a disagreeing appropriately skill. Or accepting apologies, accepting compliments, being on time. All these things I'm able to notice as a skill. Here's some others. So also an approach called skill training, skill streaming. Again, get a hold of the book. Maybe it's in your library. We do have it. Great. Borrow it. I don't know that everyone needs a copy, but borrow it and look at it, because look at all the different ways that they're existing for teaching skills. Maybe some of these are useful to you. Paths. Anyone come across paths?
We have this one too, Illinois School for the Deaf.
Okay, microphone. See, it's towards the end of the day and we're getting
We
sloppy.
have skill streaming and paths in the ISRC library. Illinois School for the Deaf used to use paths many years ago.
Yes, and maybe they're the source of the research that was done, because paths is the only program that I've come across that was actually, there's research on use with deaf children. And here's some of the references. Maybe it was at Illinois School for the Deaf. The strength of PAS, here's a tool from PAS, this red, yellow, green, which the stoplight, which I also like. Here's another lesson, do turtle. Anyone ever do turtle? Yeah, that's a big one. It's such a great metaphor, it's hard to resist. And it's many years ago, before I knew any of this. I was a nursery school teacher many, many years ago. And we used to do turtle. And it's nice. It's a way to stop, go in your shell, think, get ready, come back out, take a step. There's lots of books on the subject. And when I was trying to develop my chapters in here on conflict resolution, I went to all these books about teaching conflict resolution to children. The literature's out there, the research is out there. You educate yourself, and you be exposed to a few methods. And again, this is an area where I think mental health and teaching can very nicely work together, because both are concerned with the development of these psychosocial skills. Maybe you don't have time as a teacher to have a conflict resolution session, but maybe a counselor can help you with that. Or maybe you can work together in some way. I mean, that's at least the ideal. This is an important slide, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes on it and then wrap up. The ways to do this, there are informal and formal ways. Informally, means I didn't plan a lesson. It's just the opportunity presented itself. A conflict is happening right now, so I'm going to step in right now and see if I can use the collaborative problem solving in the moment to develop skills. It's informal. It's not a curriculum. It's just seizing the moment. Another informal thing to do is that doesn't really take any time. When you see a skill, if you've got your skill vocabulary down and you saw listening skills or accept apology skills or offer apology skills, you say, nice offering apology skills. Or even better, that skill, what was that? If you have the time to pull it out of them to get them to tell you. Informally, you don't have to have a class to do that. You don't have to have a curriculum to do that. You just know about skills and you build it into your interactions with people all day long. Now, Socratic teaching is, in my mind, and I think this is a common idea, the most skilled teaching. So telling people is okay, we do a lot of that, but pulling things out of them or guiding people to problem solve, champ. That's the top of that's A+ teacher, A+ therapist. Work to develop those skills. Collaborative problem solving is a good way to practice to develop those skills. Proactively, that's when you have your curriculum. Okay, we're going to do PAS or skill streaming, and we're going to start in kindergarten, and we're going to do kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and we're going to follow the curriculum, each year advancing their skills, and we're going to do formal skill training classes. Decide whether, as a school system, you want to invest in that. I found working with adults that I couldn't do that. They had no patience for it. I had to do it in the moment, informally. But I think with children, there's more, if you can build it into your classroom, there's more opportunity for that. And of course, corrective teaching. An example. Working in one of the group homes, one of the persons in the house, I would come into the house, I'm talking to somebody, he would come over, interrupt, step right in the middle, interrupt the conversation, and start talking about himself, which got the other person really angry. Obviously, skill deficits there. What are they? He's interrupting. He's not introducing himself appropriately. He's not waiting. There's no communication process. None of that's going on. He's poor judge of social circumstance. It's like, you walk and people are talking, you step back, you wait for your moment, and you go in. He doesn't know any of that. I would do corrective teaching. I would say, hold. We'd stop. Do you mind 1 minute? Wait a minute. And then I would model. Good morning, Neil. How are you doing? It's nice to see you again. Do you have a moment? Can I talk with you? Are you busy right now? And I would model that. And I'd say, you do it. And I'd pull it out of him. And then I'd say, thank you. Hold. When we're finished, I'll come to you. corrective teaching. All of these are methods. The recommendation is do as much as you can. Figure out what's possible for you. Obviously, skills can be taught individually or in groups. According to identified skill deficits, we're going to work on particular communication skills right now. Turn taking, for example. In a developmentally attuned way, you try, if you're teaching conflict resolution, flipping a coin is conflict resolution. But it's not what you do at the UN, one hopes. We get more sophisticated in our conflict resolution as we grow. And your teaching method, but I think many of us learn, first conflict resolution is flipping a coin, rock, paper, scissors. And where I grew up in New York, we didn't do rock, paper, scissors. We did what we called shooting, which meant you really did 1, 2, 3, boom, 1, 2, 3, boom. Okay, and that was our conflict resolution method, and we accepted it, and it was a good way to start. Voting is conflict resolution. Although heaven knows we're still in plenty of conflict, right? Okay, so let me stop there. We have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then I get, time for 1 or 2 comments, and then I'll let you fill out your forms. Can you just, I guess my question to you is applications. What can you apply? What can you take with you? Can you get anyone short answers? Give me 1 or 2 things that you can work on and bring back to your work. And I don't know where the microphone is over there. Who was, okay.
I think that for me and maybe for everybody else or some other people, a lot of this resonated outside of the classroom into other facets of our lives, especially for my life. So I found myself kind of thinking about other situations even outside the classroom. And then also, there were many examples that came up where I was surprised to think of times that I didn't do this. And maybe like in my earlier years of teaching, when I thought of, wow, like that was a time that I wish I could go back and enact some of these skills now. So I think that this was really great training. I think it was super strong, a wealth of information. I'm so glad that I was here for this. I will definitely take away so much of what you said. And I just thank you so much for all of your knowledge. I really look forward to reading more about your research.
You know the phrase, one of my favorite phrases, that youth is wasted on the young? Yeah. Youth is wasted on the young because when you're young, you have all the energy, but you don't have the knowledge. If only we knew when we were young what we knew when we're old and tired. So I can appreciate that very much. We all learn as we go. 1 or 2 more comments and then we'll stop. What can you take with you?
No. Don't give the mic to me.
Oh, sorry.
Really, what I learned is that what is important in all of this is empathy. That's definitely what would lead to success, is to practice it for sure. That's what I'm going to take home and remember. Instead of, it's going to be a struggle sometimes, but, and I'm happy to hear that. If when you leave here, you have to remember I'm developing my empathy skills, lead with understanding, working and applying the skills, that's awesome. Great.
He's still mine, but I'll add to it. I think just a lot of us grew up with very privileged lives where we haven't had to experience a lot of the things that some of our students and families experience with. So if we can do that, take a step back, think about where these people are coming from, and give an ounce of trying to understand that. I don't think we'll ever be able to put ourselves in their shoes just because of the privilege that most of us have had. But if we can take that moment, I think it will impact teaching a lot.
And because this is mostly a hearing group, going back to the issue of cultural competencies, What is the challenge for hearing people who decide to work with deaf people? Cross-cultural empathy. What are our hearing biases? What is our autism? What is the ways in which we have learned to not understand? How much work do we put in understanding deaf people's point of view? Do we work on that? Or do we maintain the privilege of not feeling like, I don't need to, I'm here to help, not to learn? So humility is a very good skill in life, and it's especially good if you're a majority person and you're working with a minority person. We work to combat arrogance and strive for humility. What can we learn from the people we're trying to serve? And probably that's a good place to stop. So thank you for putting up with my disappearing voice and my asthma. It was a pleasure to be here.